Hello everyone, this is Kawainame TV. This video is all about what if Sasuke and Naruto went back in time. This story is a fanfiction. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Kindly click the bell button for more updates. Chapter 1. They had her trapped. Kagaya was going to be sealed away once and for all. For good. Sakura felt a rush of adrenaline as her fist collided with the goddess head, forcing her back into the boy's path. They were so close. So close. Then, suddenly, everything warped around her. She felt not the familiar sensation of Kamui, but a sick and gut-wrenching pull, a feeling not so dissimilar to that of a fall. And next she knew, she was sitting in a classroom. What the hell? Where was Kagaya? Where were Naruto and Sasuke? And for that matter, where was she? What the hell? Startled by the voice behind her, she whirled around only to see Naruto. It was indeed Naruto, but you're 12, she cried, taking in his god-awful orange and blue jumpsuit and round face, baby fat still clinging to it. Were she not so alarmed, she would have wanted to pinch his cheeks. You're 12, he shouted back, pointing an accusatory finger at her. Just look at your hair. My hair. Frowning, Sakura looked down and saw long pink locks falling down to her boobs, or lack thereof. She was also wearing that silly dress from back during her genin days, the one with the high collar and baggy sleeves. Oh god, what did that rabbit goddess bitch do? She moaned, taking it all in with displeasure. This is so weird, Naruto mumbled, sitting back and grabbing handfuls of his spiky hair. Speak for yourselves, a new voice said. And holy shit, it was Sasuke. And he was 12 too. Even wearing that blue shirt of his with the insane collar that she had thought was so cool at the time. Sasuke, Sakura gasped, unsure what to say. What the hell? The only response she got was that annoying HN of his before he lapsed into pensive silence. It was contagious, because the next thing they knew, the whole room was silent, filled only with the sound of their panicked breaths. They were 12. They were in a classroom. They were alone. Judging from all the facts, it looked to be the day of their team assignments. All three of them were wearing their headbands, and they were completely alone in the classroom. That hadn't happened once after being assigned teams. The multitude of possibilities as to how this could be started flitting through Sakura's mind, each more scary than the last. Is this? Naruto started, eyeing their surroundings wearily. A genjutsu. Behind him, Sasuke scoffed. I'm immune to genjutsu now, so that's impossible. Naruto scowled before turning to the now preteen. Yeah well, how do I know you're not part of the genjutsu? He exclaimed. Because if you're in a genjutsu, it doesn't normally point out that it's a genjutsu, the boy shot back. Naruto opened his mouth to retort, but found that the logic, however unorthodox, was sound. So, scowling, he sat back down with a huff and simply glared at his teammate. Sasuke seemed satisfied with the action as well and resumed his thinking pose, or whatever it was, clasping his hands in front of his face and retaining a constipated expression. Actually, that could just be his default expression. You never knew with the Uchiha. Alright, now that we've cleared that up, Sakura grumbled from the front of the classroom, hands on her hips. Are we going to find a way to get back to the battle? At the confused expressions of her teammates, she elaborated. We can't just leave Kakashi-sensei alone in that dimension, she said. And everyone else is still stuck in the infinite Tsukuyomi. Oh, Naruto mumbled, eyes downcast. Right. So what do we do? Sakura asked. A moment passed before anyone bothered speaking up. What can we do? Surprisingly, it was Naruto who spoke. Sakura frowned at his reply before gesturing for him to continue. Well, he started uncomfortably, shifting in his seat. What I'm saying is, if we don't know how we got here, or where here even is, how can we figure out how to get back? He was right, though she was loath to admit so. There's gotta be something, Sakura insisted. I mean, every jutsu has a way to counter it. If this is another dimension Kagaya threw us into, or a genjutsu, there's a way to get out. You're really limiting your options there, Sasuke's voice suddenly drawled. Sakura turned to him, pinching her brow in confusion. Sasuke sighed before elaborating. You claim it's either one of two things, he said, holding up two fingers. 1. He put one finger down. It's another dimension, like the ones we traveled through while fighting her. He put up his second finger. Or 2, it's a genjutsu. This has been established, yes, Sakura said, unimpressed. What I'm getting at is there could be a third option, he finished, putting his hand back down. That we're just not considering. Oh yeah, and what's that, bastard? Naruto challenged. The small smirk the Uchiha wore grated on Sakura's nerves. Whatever he was about to say, she knew she wouldn't like. Time travel. Time travel. Really, Sasuke? Sakura deadpanned. The Uchiha only shrugged. And do you have a way to prove that? Maybe Sasuke didn't, but Naruto did, he realized with a start. I do, he exclaimed, jumping up. Or at least, I think I do. His teammates gave him an apprehensive look, but didn't tell him off. He took that to mean he should go ahead and explain. Okay, so, 2 days ago I was on this turtle island with Killer Bee where Kurama and I had this big battle over his chakra, right? He was met with blank stares. Right, so, anyway, he continued. I changed the seal holding in Kurama. If it's still the same one I had in the war, we'll know it's not time travel. But if it's the old one the fourth gave you, it is, Sakura finished, catching on to what he was saying. But how will you be able to tell? She asked. Easy, he smiled. I'll talk to him. Sakura and Sasuke exchanged an uneasy look, neither looking particularly thrilled at his proposed idea. Come on, it's not like he's gonna show up, he grumbled. Did they really not have faith in him? That was disheartening. Sakura's scowl deepened, but then she nodded. Alright, if you think it's the right thing to do, I believe you. A pause. Then, right, Sasuke? The Uchiha sighed from his seat before nodding. Sure, whatever. Pleased, Naruto nodded to them before slipping into his mindscape. There was a moment of silence, and then, Naruto. Naruto was so startled that he almost jumped back into the real world. He quickly regained his composure and walked up to the seal, meeting Kurama's red gaze. What have you done, brat? The fox yelled, banging a giant clawed hand against the bars of his prison. His prison, which Naruto was disheartened to see, made from the old seal. Hey Kurama, he said tentatively, not sure if this was new Kurama or old, grouchy Kurama who wanted to eat his face. Don't, hey Kurama, me, what have you done? Why am I back in Namikaze's seal? New Kurama then. Angry Kurama, but new nonetheless. I don't know, that's what we're trying to figure out, he tried. Yeah, Sakura, Sasuke and I. The response was met with another bang on the seal, this time hard enough to rattle the sewer around him, sending waves crashing around him. Whoa, watch it, Naruto cried, bracing himself against the sloshing water. You're gonna break something. You and I both know that's impossible, Kurama growled. Now hurry up and fix this, brat. If you had been listening you would know I can't, you dumb fox. Naruto shouted back. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We've been shot back in time by Kagaya and we're trying to figure out how to fix it. If you open this door I might be able to help, the fox suggested. But it was such a transparent lie that all Naruto could do was cross his arms and give with the most unimpressed look he could muster. I thought we'd come to an agreement, he scowled. Besides, I need the key to open that door. And if I'm right, the toads still have it. The fox growled again, but didn't threaten anything, so Naruto counted it as a plus. So, the fox mumbled, or what could be interpreted as a mumble, it was hard to tell with a chakra beast. We really are back in time. Naruto nodded. How old are you? 12, he said. Probably. A rough laugh escaped Kurama. Just a kid, he scoffed. Pathetic. Naruto huffed. Well, you're still stuck with this, kid, until we can find a way to fix this. So you better get used to it. Whatever, the fox grumbled. Just make it quick, you know I hate this cage. Yeah, he said, waving the fox off. Just don't wreck the place while I'm gone. He could have sworn he heard a muffled, brat, as he slipped out of the mindscape, but he wasn't going to stop and ask. Naruto blinked open his eyes to see green and black staring back at him. 2 inches from his face. Whoa, he cried, startled, before hitting his head on the desk behind him as he fell back. Needless to say he had bad memories of the last time such a thing had happened in this particular classroom. Sakura and Sasuke were standing right in front of his face, staring at him intently. Well, Sakura pressed. What's the conclusion? Naruto grimaced. Well, Sasuke was right, he said, picking himself up from the desk. It's not a genjutsu. Or another dimension. Sakura blinked. Once. Twice. Fuck. Okay, time travel, Sakura stated, some measure of exasperation coating her tone. If we can have reanimation, why not time travel, why not? Both Naruto and Sasuke were sitting in the back of the classroom, cowering away from her, not that one of them would admit that. The first 10 minutes after hearing that they had, in fact, time traveled into their 12-year-old bodies was filled with lots of screaming, throwing things, and a broken desk. Naruto was sure Iruka would be scratching his head over it tomorrow, but now wasn't the time to think about such things. 30 minutes had now passed and Sakura had calmed down significantly. Now, instead of throwing things around and threatening people's lives, namely Kagaya's, she was pacing the front of the class and tugging at her hair that she had cut short sometime during her ranting. The remnants were still lying on the floor by the chalkboard, scattered about because she had thrown them. Now her hair hung around chin level, like it always had after the Chunin exams. But still, it only went to prove how badly she was taking this. Hey, you know what, she said, addressing them. It's not that different, right? Not that different from what? Naruto asked cautiously. Edo Tensei, she said. I mean, all you're doing there is putting a soul into a body. This is the same thing, right? Our 17-year-old souls are in our 12-year-old bodies. Ergo, not that different. Her voice was shrill and wavering on every word, going to show just how much she was trying to keep it together. Well, 16 for you, Naruto, she added as an afterthought. That earned her an indigent squawk. Hey, it's my 17th birthday. I'm 17. We don't know what time it was when Kagaya dragged us into that lava world, Sasuke cut in. Time stopped mattering after that point, so it could easily still have been the 9th when we were shot back. Naruto's face was growing steadily more red at their statements. He opened his mouth to shout something back, but was stopped by the sound of the door to the classroom opening. All their heads swiveled to see an incredibly familiar masked face looking at them with an indifferent expression. My first impression of you, he said. You're interesting. Chapter 2. The first thing Kakashi noticed as he stepped into the classroom was the destroyed desk. That in itself was unusual. Then he spotted the locks of pink hair strewn across the floor, indicative of a rough, spur-of-the-moment haircut. Then he spotted the pacing girl with matching pink hair and the two boys cowering from her in the back of the classroom. And then everything made sense. She scared the shit out of them. This might be fun after all. My first impression of you, he started, watching as all their heads snapped in his direction. You're interesting. He wasn't really expecting much after he made that statement. And he definitely wasn't expecting the Uzumaki's mouth to drop open in shock. Whatever. Meet me on the roof. And with that, he disappeared in a shunshin. Naruto looked at Sasuke. Sasuke looked at Naruto. They both looked at Sakura. What the fuck? It doesn't matter who said it. They were in unanimous agreement anyway. Did he just? Naruto started. He interesting, you know. Do you think he could be? Sakura trailed off, looking to her teammates. Could he be our Kakashi-sensei? She asked in a rough whisper. The only two could only shrug. He didn't say he hated us, Sasuke offered. Not like last time. Yeah, but Sakura didn't destroy the room last time, Naruto mumbled in response. The pink had heard, much to his chagrin, and threw him a nasty look. Well, the only way we'll know is if we go up and talk to him, she said, brushing off Naruto's comment quickly. But if he was, she added hesitantly. He would have picked up on, well, she gestured around herself. This. Yeah, last time half the classroom hadn't been destroyed, nor had Sakura had a psychotic break and chopped her hair off. Maybe he did notice and was downplaying it. Naruto suggested half-heartedly, shrugging. Well, there's only way one to find out, Sasuke replied, arms crossed in front of him. At the looks he received from his teammates, he continued. Talk to him. Yeah, but how? The blonde Jinchuriki demanded. It's not like we can just ask, hey, are you from the future, you know, 'cause we are. We're ninja, dumbass, we can figure something out, Sasuke shot back dirly. Naruto scowled, but didn't retort. How about this? Sakura interjected. We could use words or phrases he would only pick up on if he was our Kakashi-sensei, Sakura offered. For instance, if we made a comment about something that happened on a mission, or maybe some ninja we've faced before. But in a casual way. It was a sound plan, and no one would get suspicious of it if they overheard. Not a bad idea, Sasuke agreed, nodding his assent. A faint blush lit up Sakura's cheeks at the praise, but it was gone in an instant. So that's the plan? Naruto asked. Subtle hints and stuff. The other nodded. Alright then, let's go re-meet Kakashi-sensei. Their plan was working perfectly, up until the point when they walked out onto the rooftop and Naruto shouted at almost the top of his lungs, Kaguya. Unfortunately, the only reaction that wrought from their teacher was a raised eyebrow and a half-kissed eye. Well, shit. They were truly alone in this. Before Naruto could begin to imagine what that really meant for them, something whacked him hard in the gut. Oof. Naruto dibbles over as Sakura landed an elbow in his stomach. Idiot, she hissed. You were supposed to be subtle. What is with these kids? Kakashi thought to himself as he watched them make their way awkwardly over to him. They sat down on the stairs like they had last time, Naruto on the edge, Sakura in the middle, and Sasuke on her right. After settling themselves, Kakashi spoke up. Alright, introductions. Go. The three, genin, shared a look of uncertainty between them. Or at least two of them did. Sasuke was still being an obstinate little shit. After a shared look between the pinkett and the blonde, Sakura took the initiative and answered Kakashi first. Could you give us an example? She asked, looking back over at the Jonin. Sure, he shrugged. Just say your name, likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams for the future. He shrugged. Stuff like that. A smirk lit up Naruto's face at the response, and Sakura knew immediately he was planning something. Could you go first? The Uzumaki asked. So we know how it's done. Kakashi gave him an unimpressed look, but complied regardless. Sakura flashed her teammate a quick look, trying to ask without words what he was planning. He only gave her a wink back. Well, Kakashi started, distracting her from her thoughts. My name is Kakashi Hatake. I like some things, dislike others. As for my hobbies, well, I have some. And dreams for the future, I have no intention of telling you those. Sakura huffed, nonplussed. It was just like last time. Honestly, why had she expected any different? Now, Blondie, their sensei said. Your turn. The devilish smirk on Naruto's face almost made her weary. My name's Naruto Uzumaki, Naruto started proudly. I like some things, he continued, grin slowly spreading on his face. Dislike others. I have hobbies, but I don't want to share them. And I do have a dream for the future. He smiled contentedly to himself before crossing his arms and sitting back. Finished. Seeing Kakashi-sensei's eye twitch in annoyance was far more pleasurable than it had any right to be. Sakura thought. So that's what he was planning. Payback. Alright, the scarecrow said, a faint edge to his voice. Pinky's turn. Sakura couldn't help the mischievous smirk that graced her face before she spoke. My name is Sakura Haruno, she proclaimed. But you already knew that since you read our files. I won't tell you what I like or dislike, and my hobbies are my own business, not yours. As for dreams for the future, personal. This time a spasm went through their sensei. Well hidden, yes, but they could tell. And they were pleased. Fine, he bit out, just barely holding on to his aloof persona. Your last, broody. HN. And that was all they got out of Sasuke. If Kakashi-sensei hadn't been ex-Anbu and an elite Jonin, Naruto was sure he would have lost his shit right then and there. The man's eye was visibly spasming, fingers twitching like he wanted to reach for a kunai. Hey, messing with Kakashi-sensei was fun. Alright, fine, he finally said, glaring at the three of them. My name is Kakashi Hatake. I like dogs. I dislike sweets. I enjoy reading, and my dream for the future is to never have to deal with you brats again. Great, Naruto cried. 'Cause I like ramen, you know. I hate people who use others to get what they want, and my dream is to be Hokage, you know. Kakashi shot him a death glare, but remained quiet, realizing what was happening. And I like picking and arranging flowers, Sakura started, continuing Naruto's line of thought. Dislike when my parents make me do stupid chores, and hope to one day surpass Lady Tsunade. They all looked to Sasuke. HN, fine, the Uchiha grumbled. I don't like much, I hate sweets, and my dream is to restore my clan. He looked over towards his teammates, annoyed. Happy. Yup. Naruto exclaimed, beaming like the sun. Well, don't get so excited just yet, Kakashi cut in, dry tone dissipating the semi-playful mood. You're still not genin yet. That damned glint was back in his eye again. The one that said he knew something that you didn't, and that something was most undoubtedly not going to be fun. Naruto decided that he would be the one to play the part of ignorant genin as he said, what do you mean? We passed the genin exam. We're genin. This earned a humorless chuckle from their soon-to-be sensei. Not quite, he said, mirth in his tone. All three, genin, squinted at him in confusion, egging him to go on. Out of the 30 or so who pass the preliminary exam, only 33% actually go on to become genin. The remaining 67% go back to the academy. Whether they pass or not is decided in a test given to them by their Jonin sensei. A pause. Which is me. So tomorrow, at Training Ground 7, we'll meet at 5 for a survival exercise that will determine if you three are even cut out to be shinobi. It was meant to be an intimidating speech. They knew that. But both Naruto and Sakura were trying desperately to keep at bay the laughter that came with the memories of their last survival exercise, which had ended in their sensei eventually losing to them all in the hopes of his favorite book not being spoiled. Unfortunately, they didn't have such an edge on him this time, but they would surely think of something. Sounds easy enough, Naruto smiled, not in the least bit phased. After all, the only thing Kakashi-sensei was looking for to pass them was teamwork, and they had that down pat. They had proven just hours ago in the war. Wow, had it really only been hours? It felt like a lifetime ago. Well, maybe this will change your mind, Kakashi-sensei said, leaning forward as if to tell them a secret. In all 6 years that I have been assigned genin teams, I have never passed one. They'd known that for a while. When Naruto had seen Iruka after having passed the bell test, the Chunin had told him about the 6 previous teams that hadn't made it. It had been in that moment that Naruto realized how lucky they were to have passed. It was flattering to know that the 3 of them had lived up to the standards the man had and were accepted as his students. And it wasn't an honor Naruto was going to soon forget, or abandon. Naruto's smile slipped then, hardening into a look of determination. Then I guess we'll just have to be the first, you know. Chapter 3. Because of how hurried things had been, Naruto hadn't had time to truly process what had happened. Hadn't had time to understand what had happened to them. They were 5 years in the past. Every accomplishment they had made, every person they had lost, every enemy they had ever defeated, was all gone now. Naruto didn't know what to think. After Kakashi-sensei had dismissed them, they had each gone their separate ways in an attempt to wrap their minds around their new situation. Sasuke had headed back in the direction of the old Uchiha compound, Sakura had gone off to one of the training grounds, and Naruto had gone up to the top of the Hokage monuments. Specifically his father's. It was now sunset, and the light of the setting sun spilled across everything, turning the world a vibrant orange. He sat on the edge and overlooked the village. It had been destroyed a few months ago for him, so seeing it whole again was jarring. He had left for Turtle Island while it was still being reconstructed, so he didn't know what it looked like during the war. Perhaps it had been almost completed. Perhaps it still looked like it had when he'd left. But now he'd never know. Time travel, he muttered to himself. What the fuck? He would be faced with discrimination again, he knew. As the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, his life had never been easy. It had gotten better though after becoming a ninja, but not truly until after the Chunin exams and after saving Gaara. He'd gotten more acknowledgement after that. People didn't jeer at him in the street or smack him on the head for being in their way. It still hadn't been ideal, but it had been a hell of a lot better than before. But that had all been stripped away in a matter of moments. Now the only accomplishments he'd made was becoming a genin. And even that wasn't official yet. It also sucked because his only friends now were his teammates. No Konoha 12, no Gaara, no Granny Tsunade, no Captain Yamato, no Sai. Hell, even no Killer Bee. It all just plain sucked. The wind whipped at his hair, rustling it as he watched the sun set over Konoha. His knees were drawn up to his chin, arms wrapped around them. He must have looked incredibly small to the world right then, instead of like the 17-year-old hero he really was. 16 my ass, he grumbled, remembering what Sakura had said earlier. It was definitely after midnight. Not that he could prove it. But it probably definitely had been. Dismissing the thought, he focused back in the problem at hand. They were all stuck in their 12-year-old bodies. That meant no Kyuubi mode for Naruto, no 100 Hands of Healing mark for Sakura, and no Rinnegan for Sasuke. They were all back to square one. Luckily they still had all their memories and skills, so fighting and chakra control wouldn't be too much of an issue. But strength-wise, they'd all have to build it up again. As well as height. Geez, being a shorty again sucked. Sighing, Naruto unfurled from himself and stretched his legs out, leaning back on his hands. There was still an issue he hadn't addressed yet. But it was one he really didn't want to, either. Jiraiya was alive. His godfather. That loss had been a knife to the heart. Accepting that he was still around but didn't even know him yet, Naruto wasn't sure how to feel about it. Hell, that wasn't even mentioning the fact that Old Man Third was still kicking. The likelihood of running into the latter was far higher than it was with the former, and if so, Naruto wasn't sure if he would be able to keep himself in check. But that was part of being a ninja, wasn't it? Facing hard situations. Come on, stupid, he grumbled to himself. You beat the Akatsuki and Madara, you can face a stupid old man. A stupid old man who he had just been fighting with on the battlefield a few hours ago, along with his dad and 2 other Hokage. Geez, his life was complicated. Naruto jumped, surprised, he hadn't heard anyone coming. He silently cursed himself for his distraction. Twisting around he saw Sakura standing at the edge of the cliff above him, looking down at him. Her pink hair swayed in the wind, choppy edges flying around her face. I thought I might find you here. Sakura, he said, jumping up the edge in one chakra-enhanced bound. What are you doing here? I wanted to go over the plan for tomorrow with you and Sasuke. As well as the plan for, well, after that. Meaning Orochimaru, the Akatsuki, Obito, Madara, Kagaya, all of it. Yeah, sure, he agreed, tone somewhat subdued. So here should we meet? Sakura gave him a faint smile. Follow me. You're kidding me. What? It's the perfect meeting spot, Sakura defended against Naruto's sigh. She had led him to the memorial stone by Training Ground 7. Its inscriptions bore the names of those who had fallen in service to Konoha. I wonder if Mom and Dad are on there, Naruto thought idly before being pulled back to the present by Sakura tugging sharply on his wrist. So we're all here, then. A new voice said. Naruto was surprised to find that Sasuke had already arrived and was leaning up against of the training posts in the field. Yup, Sakura replied. Let's get to work. They all sat around in front of the stone obelisk, sitting in their own unique way. Sakura was sat with her legs folded beneath her, prim and proper, while Naruto sat crisscross with hands tucked between his legs. Sasuke had taken up leaning against one of the posts, arms folded in front of him like they always were. It made something inside Naruto ache with nostalgia. When was the last time they had all sat around like this? 4 years ago. 5, even. He couldn't remember. Alright, we should take stock, Sakura said, voice firm and commanding, breaking Naruto out of his reverie. What do we have available to us? And, more importantly, what don't we? I don't have my eternal Mangekyo, Sasuke piped up, deciding to go first. Rinnegan either. But I still have my normal Mangekyo. Sakura nodded, making a mental note of that. Okay, in that case, you should try to limit your use of it unless it's absolutely necessary so you don't go blind quicker. Sasuke considered her words for a brief moment before nodding. I don't have my 100 hands of healing or the strength I did before, Sakura reported, as it was now her turn to speak. The strength should be easy to get back, but the other thing, I'll need Lady Tsunade to help me with the seal for that. Alright then, Naruto thought. They just had to make sure to bring Tsunade back to Konoha again. Whether or not she'd also become Hokage was a different matter. Hopefully Lord Third wouldn't die if they managed to do things right. But it really was too soon to tell. And Naruto, Sakura said, snapping him out of his thoughts. You said you had your old seal again. Does that mean you can't access the Kyuubi's chakra like you did back there? Back there in the war. Naruto shook his head. If I tried, it would be like the time pain attacked. I wouldn't be in control. Sakura's expression flashed to something akin to pain and regret, and Naruto knew she was remembering what that entailed. Let's hope it never comes to that, she said softly. Naruto could only nod mutely in agreement. Silence fell over the small group after that, each not knowing where to go now. The air around was getting colder now that the sun had set, making Sakura shiver. So, the girl piped up. Now for the elephant in the room. We're in the past, she clipped. Now what? That depends, Sasuke replied dryly. Do we want to change things or leave them be? Change things, of course. Naruto cried. The only response the Uchiha gave was a HN and a shrug. Geez, some things never change, Naruto thought with a pout. Okay, but how do we do that? Sakura pressed, taking charge again. When no one answered, she slumped where she sat. Are you telling me neither of you two can figure out where things went wrong? If you wanted to stop it there, we're 15 years too late, Sasuke bit out. You'd have to stop Obito from getting crushed so Madara wouldn't sink his claws into him, thus releasing the Kyuubi and destroying a lot of people's lives, he continued. But as it is, we can't. Well fine, Sakura shot back angrily. But there are definitely things we can change here and now. Yeah, let me go after Itachi, was the boy's response. I can save him, so that maybe this time I'll still have family. If you leave the village you'll be branded a rogue ninja, Naruto finally cut in, tone deadly serious. His eyes were hard as he stared his teammate down. I won't stop you if you chose to, I know how much family means. But we can't help you after that. And you will need help. The Uchiha stared him down for a long few moments, black bleeding red as his Sharingan spun to life. It wasn't a declaration of war, just a threat. A threat Naruto didn't back down from as he maintained eye contact, his gaze holding fast. Fine, the Uchiha finally growled. But my only goal is to save Itachi, and kill Danzo, he said. Know that. Naruto nodded solemnly in reply. So aside from Itachi and Danzo, Sakura said slowly, looking between the two boys. What else should we do? Naruto didn't even have to think before responding. Orochimaru, he piped up. We gotta stop him. Orochimaru is the reason your dad and the other Hokage fought with us, Sasuke cut in before Sakura managed to. He knows a lot of things that could help us win this war. I didn't say we had to kill him. Naruto shot back. He can rot in jail for all I care. I just won't let him hurt anyone else ever again. So how do we do that? Sakura demanded. He's a Sannin. He's bigger, and stronger, and smarter than all of us. Yeah, but we got something he doesn't, Naruto smirked. Sakura raised a pink eyebrow in confusion. Knowledge. We know where he's gonna be and when. All we gotta do is tip off the right people and boom. He snaked his hand to his fist. One Sannin coming right up. Both Sasuke and Sakura gave him a dubious look, but neither contradicted him. Well then, that just takes care of one problem, Sakura finally said. But there's still the Akatsuki. And on that note, Obito and Madara. That's 3 years away, Sasuke pointed out. They won't surface until then, so there's nothing we can do without leaving the village. A long-suffering sigh escaped the Pinkett, but she let the issue be. Okay, so we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Both the boys gave uneasy nods, Naruto's more reluctant than Sasuke's. Okay, Sakura said. Now for the bell test. This was going to be fun. Chapter 4. Even though they all knew Kakashi-sensei wouldn't arrive until late morning, all 3 members of Team 7 showed up at Training Ground 7 at 6 in the morning. They had all eaten breakfast, ignoring yesterday's suggestion against it. If they were going to pull this off, they would need all the strength they could get. Besides, Kakashi-sensei hadn't told them not to eat. He'd only suggested, so they weren't going to get into trouble. Hey Naruto, Sakura greeted him, rubbing her eyes. She hadn't slept well last night. In fact, none of them had, judging by the bags under their eyes. Maybe after they pulled this off they could take a nap. Maybe. Did you bring the stuff? Naruto smirked and tipped his backpack over, spilling the entire contents onto the ground. You bet I did. Out fell exploding tags, an excessive amount of ninja wire, smoke bombs, small paint cans, bags of glitter, rope, and anything else they might need for setting traps. Great, Sakura smiled. Let's get to work. At first their plan was to just simply let things happen as they had last time. It would be much easier, and they would still get the same results. But ultimately they had decided against, choosing in favor to fuck with Kakashi-sensei as much as possible. He deserved it after all, what with all tardiness and trolling. If he was going to be a little shit to them, then by God were they going to be little shits back. Hence their revenge plans. They would set up traps all around the training ground until the place was practically saturated, and one wouldn't even be able to take a step without setting something off. The next part was proving teamwork, because perhaps just simply getting the bells wouldn't be enough for their belligerent sensei. Naruto had suggested playing it out like one of Shikamaru's games of shogi, altering variables and changing tactics until they managed to make checkmate, retrieving the bells in this case. Sakura had completely stunned by the suggestion and had forgotten to respond for nearly a minute. But it was a good plan, so they went with it. 3 hours later the trio had rigged the entire training ground with various traps, relying on Naruto's knowledge of panks to make them the best, and most annoying, traps possible. Not all of them were for show. They had to trigger a few specific traps for their plan to work, but they were confident that it would work out. Now they just had to wait for their sensei. Hey Sakura, Naruto said, hands behind his head as he sprawled across the grass. Yeah, do you wanna get ramen after this? Why? She asked. Well, I haven't had it in months, he admitted, thinking back to Turtle Island and the long ship ride to get there. And I really miss it. Idiot, she sighed. It wasn't even a month, don't exaggerate. Naruto huffed loudly in displeasure, but didn't retort. They fell back into silence again, waiting for their perpetually late sensei to arrive. After about 30 minutes, they finally heard a voice say, Yo. You're late. Both Sakura and Naruto cried, jumping up from the ground. Well, you see, he started, about to begin a tirade of excuses. A black cat crossed the road, so I had to take the long way around, but then there was an old lady who needed help with her groceries. And I couldn't simply stand by and leave her to break a hip or something, so I had to help. For 4 hours. Sakura deadpanned. They were used to his bullshit, but his excuses were just pathetic. If they didn't know he'd actually spent the time talking to gravestones, they'd be furious. Ma, that's just how things go. All 3 genin had to work very hard to resist the urge to roll their eyes. Well, now that I'm here, their sensei began again. How about I explain the survival exercise? Please, Naruto groaned. Let's get on with this. Well, you see these? Their sensei asked, pulling out 2 bells. Your objective is to get one of these bells from me by noon. If you fail to do so, you'll be sent back to the academy. His voice was mildly cheerful, but his eye promised pain. But sensei, Sakura piped up. You only have 2 bells. That's right, he said, flashing them an eye smile. One of you will fail, and whoever does gets to sit and watch the rest of us eat our lunch. Unlike the last time, the mention of lunch didn't make their stomachs growl in protest. Kakashi-sensei noticed this and raised a line eyebrow. You 3 all ate breakfast, didn't you? He accused, not used to having his orders ignored. His statement was met with nods from all 3. You only suggested we didn't eat, Naruto pointed out. Not that we couldn't eat. Kakashi would have liked to have it known in that moment that he really wished Naruto had gotten a little less of his father's smart-ass personality. Damn Minato. Fine, he said. We begin on my count. And remember, if you don't come at me with the intent to kill, you won't get a bell. All 3 of the Genins' faces hardened. Ready, Kakashi drawled. Go. They zipped off in a blur and Kakashi suddenly found he was alone in the large clearing. Well hidden, Kakashi-sensei commented idly from the middle of the now empty clearing. From the bush he was hiding in, Naruto caught Sakura's gaze from across the way and gave a small nod. Phase 1 was in motion. From the trees where Sakura was perched came a barrage of shuriken, all aimed in Kakashi-sensei's general direction. He watched them lazily and didn't even bother sidestepping any as they all the dirt around his feet. You might need to work on your aim, there, he drawled, utterly unimpressed. Wasn't aiming for you, Sakura chirped before jumping to another hiding spot. Kakashi-sensei didn't even have a moment to think over what that meant before the ground beneath his feet exploded as their buried exploding tags were activated. Kakashi had to jump away quickly and retreat to the top of one of the training posts in order to avoid the blast. While he had been distracted, Sakura had managed to find a new hiding spot. Not bad, he noted, eyeing the training grounds, which were torn apart from the explosions. There went any earth jutsu he might have wanted to use. But that doesn't help you get the bells. Helps distract you. A sudden voice from behind him cried. He only had a moment to duck a leg that came sweeping across before sending a harsh kick to the offending party. The Naruto clone that had attacked him burst into a cloud of smoke at the connection, only for a kunai to come flying through it. Damn, he thought as he jumped out of the way. This kid is better than I thought. Another 2 clones ran up to him, pressing him back into the woods with another round of kunai and shuriken. He took another bound back, only to suddenly find his foot caught in a snare as he was hoisted up into a tree. Wasting no time, he cut himself down as another orange-clad assailant threw himself at him. He popped the clone easily, watching with mild alarm as the other was caught in a similar trap. Did they rig the entire forest? He thought, bewildered. The more alarming part of that thought was that they could have rigged it so much that they had forgotten where all the traps were placed. Shooting a quick glance around, he did indeed spot barely hidden ninja wire, rope, and even a bag of, was the glitter. Kakashi didn't even want to know what the trap was supposed to do. Either way, if he intended to stay in the forest, half his attention would have to be on those traps. And if the brats decided to gang up on him as a unit, it would be over for him. Clearing it was then, he thought begrudgingly. This was what they wanted, he knew, but he still had a better chance at fight out there than he did in here with all these traps. Damn, these brats were evil. There were no more clones around to attack him, Kakashi noted, but that didn't mean any weren't lying in wait. Wearily, he stood up and jumped up onto a tree branch, surveying the ground below. No Narutos. Not here at least. Narrowing his eye, he hopped to the next branch and on towards the clearing. If those brats wanted him there, by God was he going to show them just who they were dealing with. Did he take the bait? Sasuke asked, crouched on the tree branch beside Naruto. Naruto nodded, having received his clone's memories. He's headed to the clearing now. And he looks pissed. He'd most likely figured out they wanted him in the clearing and was coming full force. Which could end very badly for them. Sasuke smiled darkly. Good. Naruto scowled and shot the Uchiha a look. Just stick to the plan, he hissed. Even though he knew Sasuke was back on their side for the most part, the image of him almost killing Sakura still played in his head. He didn't want to relive that right now, thanks. The boy just waved him off. Yeah, whatever. Naruto bit his lip to keep from retorting. There. Sasuke suddenly hissed, pointing towards the training posts. He's back. Naruto picked himself up from his crouch and dusted off his pants, looking towards his friend as he did the same. Then let's finish this thing. They jumped off the branch and were in the clearing. No cherry blossom. How disappointing, Kakashi-sensei sighed once he spotted them, referring to their other teammate. Well, you get us, so deal with it, you know. Naruto shouted back, jabbing a thumb at himself for emphasis. Kakashi-sensei looked as unimpressed as always, but Naruto could see the slight edge to his stance as he readied himself for their assault. In a flash, the two boys jumped towards their teacher, kunai and shuriken at the ready. Sasuke went first, throwing his deadly accuracy. Naruto followed, aiming for all the places Kakashi-sensei would escape to, forcing him back. Naruto! Sasuke shouted in warning as he watched their sensei fly through hand signs. Got it. Before Kakashi-sensei could strike the ground with a Chidori and fry them, Naruto unleashed a strong wind jutsu, combining the force element of Rasengan and his own wind nature to disrupt their sensei's jutsu in its entirety. The look of surprise on Kakashi-sensei's face was almost comical, but it was swept quickly under the rug as they began their assault again. Sasuke jumped behind him, readying a fire-style jutsu while Naruto stayed in front, attacked with taijutsu. He swung a hard kick towards Kakashi-sensei, which was easily blocked by him simply grabbing his leg. Suddenly Naruto was being thrown behind him and straight into Sasuke's line of fire. He stopped his jutsu and the two collided hard and toppled to the ground in a heap of limbs. Not bad, Kakashi-sensei drawled, dusting off his hands smugly. But still not good enough. A growl of frustration escaped Sasuke as they picked themselves up. Good thing we're just getting started, he shot back. Kakashi merely raised an amused eyebrow in response. The two were off again, this time going for dual combat. Sasuke went low, sweeping with a leg while Naruto went high, first ready to collide with that stupid mask of his. Kakashi jumped deftly over the swipe and caught the oncoming fist in his hand, kicking Sasuke on the back on his way down. They would be doing so much better right now if they had let themselves use their actual skills, Naruto thought bitterly to himself. He was thrown to the ground again, rolling some ways until skidding to a stop in the dirt. He looked up, spotting Sasuke in a similar position near him. But that wasn't who he was looking for. Far off in the trees he spotted a familiar set of green eyes and pink hair. They exchanged a quick look and the other person nodded. It was go time. On my signal, Naruto hissed to Sasuke, jumping back to keep distance between him and the Jonin. Following suit, Sasuke didn't even have to ask as he saw the boy take a ready stance. The Uchiha flew through hand sign and built up hot chakra in his chest, ready to go. Now, Naruto shouted. A burst of wind came roaring out of his hand, rushing toward their sensei. Wind style, Gale Palm. Sasuke took that moment to release his own jutsu, spewing forth an inferno from his mouth. Fire style, Fireball Jutsu. The jutsus clashed and the wind helped to accelerate the fire, pushing it hot and fast towards their sensei in a blistering storm. Shit, was all they heard from their sensei. They had him cornered, just as they'd planned. The forest to his left was covered in traps, too dangerous to make an escape in. The ground below him was cracked from Sakura's multiple exploding tags, so no escaping through there. And they'd aimed the blast from their jutsu upwards, so that route was also not viable. That only left backwards and to the right. And, just as they'd calculated, he went right. The man jumped to the side, quick as a flash, but Sakura was waiting. Nimbly, she grabbed at the bells hanging from his vest whilst also aiming a strong roundhouse kick right into his solar plexus. He went flying back, hitting a tree hard enough for them to hear it crack. Then the tinkle of bells sounded, and it was all over. When the smoke cleared, they were faced with scorched earth and a bewildered sensei leaning up against a tree. His eye was almost as wide as one of Naruto's ramen bowls as he eyed the three of them. Chuckling to himself, Naruto dusted off his hands nonchalant and folded them behind his head, grinning like a maniac. How, in the hell, Kakashi-sensei managed, dumbfounded. He only received laughter in response. We had it all planned out since yesterday, sensei, Naruto announced cheerfully. We even made a 3-step plan. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. Yeah, step 1 of plan beat Kakashi-sensei was to set off a lot of exploding tags buried in the dirt. It would break up the ground and make it so he wouldn't be able to use any earth-style jutsu very effectively, you know, Naruto said. Because we asked around and found out what your preferred fighting style was and thought of ways to avoid them to give us the advantage. That was a lie, but it was plausible enough to be the truth. In reality, Sasuke just didn't want it to be buried up to his neck again, as it was very embarrassing the last time. Of course, they could have had Sakura straight up punching the ground again, but they didn't have that luxury this time as they had covers to keep. Step 2 of the plan was keep you out of the woods, Naruto continued. If this was going to work, we needed you out in the open. So we rigged the entire forest, you know, and even had one of my clones trip one to make you think not even we knew where they all were, because there were so many. Naruto suddenly paused to think. Which there are. Yeah, Sakura sighed next to him. Might have gone a bit overboard there. Naruto could only chuckle, rubbing the back of his head nervously. Anyway, once we had you out in the open, Sasuke and I would attack you while Sakura hid. Once we had you distracted, she would swoop in and get the bells, you know. Pretty neat plan, huh? And we got the bells, sensei, Sakura smiled sweetly, holding up both bells for emphasis. They tinkled merrily in her grasp, a great juxtaposition to their current surroundings. Does that mean we pass? Naruto saw their sensei's eye harden in annoyance before he replied. No, only one of you got the bells. And I said whoever doesn't get one goes back to the academy. Even though they knew it was utter bullshit, they decided to play along. Oh, well, okay. Deftly, Sakura handed a bell to each of the boys. There, we all got a bell. Naruto was sure that under his mask, Kakashi-sensei was beet red. So did we pass? Naruto piped up. There was a long moment of silence from their sensei, in which the man was contemplating treason by smiting all three of the brats where they stood. But he eventually decided against it, as it would be in poor taste. Yes, he finally ground out. You all pass. Chapter 5 Genin. What a nightmare. That was Kakashi Hatake's thought as he made his way towards the Hokage Tower. His hair was singed slightly at the edges from the giant wind-aided fireball the boys had thrown at him, and wasn't that surprising, Genin using elemental affinities, and his pants also had some soot on them from the exploding tags the Haruno girl had set off. No Genin team had even come close to what those three had managed today. Not with the strategizing, the skill, or the teamwork. And he had been thoroughly humiliated by it. On top of that, he hadn't even had a chance to read his favorite book, Ika Ika, so that had been a blow. All in all, he smelled like smoke and had the disposition of a cat dunked in water, which is to say, very sour. But it hadn't all been bad. The three hadn't scoffed at what he'd told them about teamwork. They'd taken it in with serious expressions, like it was the most important thing to being a ninja. He reflected back on that conversation. Do you know what this stone is? He asked, walking up to the memorial stone. Instinct drove his eye to search out a familiar name. Obito Uchiha. It's a memorial, the Haruno girl spoke up. For all the shinobi killed in the line of duty. Kakashi nodded. That's correct. Shooting them a quick glance, he was pleased to find that all of them had either relatively somber or pensive looks on their faces. Good, at least they had respect for the fallen. The names of my best friend and sensei are carved into this stone, he went on to say, missing Naruto's flinch and Sasuke's narrowed eyes. They died fighting for this village, and for the beliefs they held. He turned around to face them. Do you know what it is? The three shared a cautious look before shaking their heads. In the shinobi world, those who break the rules are considered scum. But those who abandon their friends are worse than scum. He glanced down at Obito's name again. I learned that lesson the hard way. But you three will know it well by the time I'm done with you. A strong wind blew through the clearing, and for a long moment the only audible sound was that of leaves rustling in the morning breeze. All right. With a glance back, Kakashi noted that it was Naruto. But you didn't need to tell me that. Because I'll never abandon my friends no matter what. I'll always protect my precious people, even if it kills me, you know. The look he gave was hard and determined. For a second, Kakashi saw Obito in him, the way he looked right before going back for Rin. It was unwavering, and more than he would have ever expected from a fresh genin. I'm glad, was all he could reply with. Kakashi was snapped out of his memory when he suddenly found himself before the Hokage Tower. Right, he had to report that they'd passed. Because they'd beaten him, Kakashi of the Sharingan, the copycat ninja. Kakashi of 1,000 jutsu. They'd beaten him, with tricks. Grumpily he way his way up the tower, glowering all the while at anyone who made eye contact with him, before stepping into the Hokage's office. Team 5 failed, Lord Hokage, one of the Jonin sensei reported. Ah, they had already started, then. Kakashi sidled in and took his place towards the back of the room. Hiruzen nodded at the Jonin's account and wrote something down on a scroll before dismissing the man and going on to the next one. Team 6 did not pass, the next Jonin reported, with a slightly frustrated expression on his face. Oh boy, what had his team done to earn such a reaction, Kakashi wondered. Probably nothing worse than his own, he figured. Alright, Hiruzen said, jotting that down as well. You are dismissed, Munona-san, the Hokage said to the Jonin. Munona gave a quick nod before retreating back. Now everyone's eyes were on Kakashi. Oh, right. They were going in numerical order. Not moving from his spot, Kakashi gave a shrug and simply said, pass. He could have heard a Senbon drop, it was so quiet. Pass. Kurenai echoed, her shocked expression mirrored by the majority of the Jonin in the room, all staring at him with wide eyes and partly open mouths. Ma, Kakashi shrugged again. I figured it was time to change things up. No one had to know he had nearly been set on fire. And like hell he was going to let his comrades know he was beaten by a bunch of pre-teens. He would like to save his dignity, thank you very much. Well, that is a pleasant surprise, Kakashi, Hiruzen smiled. Kakashi only hummed in reply. Well then, Hiruzen continued. Kurenai, teammate. Kakashi tuned the rest out, far more interested in finishing his book. After being dismissed by the Hokage, Kakashi and the rest of the Jonin soon found themselves all filing out of the office. Kakashi however lagged behind as he hated crowds. Once he deemed it clear enough, he exited the office with his nose in a book. Only to run headlong into a Chunin. Ah, Kakashi, the Chunin exclaimed, startled. I'm surprised to see you here. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. In front of him stood Iruka, the academy sensei, holding an armful of scrolls that he had, undoubtedly, been bringing to the Hokage. Well, all Jonin sensei were required to meet here, he stated. Why would it be a surprise to see me? Iruka's face took on a reddish hue, and the Chunin scratched back of his neck nervously. A habit Kakashi noted that Naruto had as well. Well, you do have a reputation for being late. No offense. Kakashi merely rolled his eye. Ma, reputations can often be misleading. Now, if you'll excuse me. He made to move around the Chunin, but was stopped when the younger man piped up. Naruto's team, he said, halting Kakashi in his tracks. Did they pass your exam? His tone was anxious. After all, Kakashi had never once passed a Genin team in his 6 years of being on the sensei roster. But this team. Slowly, Kakashi turned around and leveled Iruka with a terrifyingly dangerous glint to his eye that rivaled his Sharingan, and said in a harrowing voice, You taught monsters, Iruka. Monsters. Iruka could only blink, stunned. So, does that mean? He trailed off, ready to flee if need be. He was certain Kakashi was half a second away from releasing some major killing intent. They passed, the Jonin finally let out, causing Iruka to let out a big sigh of relief. But if they try to set me on fire again, I will personally deliver their bodies to you, because you were their academy sensei, and thus, to blame. Iruka was gaping like a fish, unable to even process a coherent thought. Kakashi, seeing his chance to escape, gave the Chunin a respectful nod before stuffing his hands in his pockets and turning down the hallway. Good day, Iruka. Iruka was left by himself to wonder just what exactly his students had done to garner this kind of response. To be honest, he was a little scared to find out. Kushina Uzumaki. There it was, his mother's name. It was carved neatly into the memorial stone right next to his father's. It felt like only yesterday he met her in his mindscape and she had told him about his dad and the night he was born. The image of her beautiful smiling face was still fresh in his mind, so seeing her name carved into the memorial for fallen soldiers was like a slap to the face. After Kakashi had given them his speech about teamwork and he'd made his proclamation, they had all left to go their separate ways. Naruto had stayed behind with the lie that he'd just done some training when the reality was he had wanted to see if he could find his parents' names on the obelisk. He wasn't entirely sure why he felt the need to though. Maybe it was for closure, or to finally pay his respects, as he hadn't ever done so before. Whatever it was, he'd felt he'd needed to, so here he was. Unconsciously, his fingers traced his mom's name, fitting themselves into the grooves of ridges of the kanji. Hey mom, he whispered. It was so quiet he could barely hear it, so he knew that if anyone was eavesdropping they would have heard nothing. His mind slowly turned to the last things she said to him before her chakra disappeared. He had never gotten the chance to reply then, so he should now. But first, Dad says hi, he continued. Or at least I think he does. We were kinda busy, so it kinda slipped our minds, you know. Silence. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that I eat my vegetables, or I will be, and that I love taking baths, so you don't need to worry about that. I made lots of friends, but things are kinda complicated right now, so we're not exactly friends yet. Tears started pricking unbidden at his eyes, and he told himself the pain in his throat was just an oncoming cough. You were right about pervy Sage though, he laughed. But I handled him fine, I think. And I haven't even touched alcohol yet. Besides, I've seen what it does to grown-ups. I don't think that'd be fun. He swiped at his eyes, sniffing so as not to let his nose run. School was pretty hard, but I graduated, so that's good. Although it did take me 3 tries. The name stared blankly back at him. Because that's all it was. A name. A name carved into a rock with so many others, names of people who'd died in the line of duty. Naruto sniffed hard again, whipping away the now free-flowing tears. I wish you were here, Mom, he choked out. You and Dad. You guys know what to do, 'cause I don't. I don't have a goddamn idea what I'm doing. But I have to because the world is depending on it. Now he was sobbing, the events of the past few days finally catching up to him. I mean, it's not like I can let K-Guy out again, or the Jubi. But what can I do about it? I'm just a stupid genin. And now everyone who was dead is alive, and people who were my friends don't even know me. God. What am I supposed to do? I don't know what to do. At the last sentence, he curled his knees up into his chest, sobbing hard into them. His hands were fisted in the fabric of his pants, so tight his knuckles had turned white. I don't know what to do, he sobbed. Then, in a whisper, I don't know what to do. The wind rustling through the trees was all the response he got. Chapter 6 Training with Kakashi-sensei hadn't been this hard the first time around, Naruto thought as he dodged another round of kunai that flew towards him. But maybe he just wasn't remembering right. 5 years was a long time to dull his memories. No, he was remembering right. This Kakashi-sensei was just a little more sadistic, he thought as an exploding tag came sailing towards him. What had they ever done to deserve this? Oh yeah, they'd kicked his ass at the bell test. Who knew Kakashi-sensei could be so petty? Too slow, said Sensei called out as the explosion went off in Naruto's face, scorching his hair. It was a small explosion, obviously, but annoying nonetheless. I'll show you slow, you know, he shouted back, picking himself up from the ground. Here he was, the savior of Konoha, getting tossed around by their lazy, porn-loving sensei. In the distance he heard Sakura chuckling, which only managed to turn his face red in embarrassment. Great, not her too, maybe if we took a break that would help, Sasuke sidled from the side. Whiner boy gets cranky when he doesn't have his nap. That was the last straw. Why you little, he charged forward towards his teammate, but was stopped at the last minute by someone grabbing his collar. Ma, that's not very good teamwork, you two, Kakashi-sensei drawled, still holding onto Naruto's collar. Ha, if only he knew. But I think Sasuke's right, he continued. Let's break for lunch. And that was how the 4 of them found themselves sitting in the shade of one of Konoha's large trees, eating their respective bentos. Hey sensei, Naruto piped up, absently pushing rice around with his chopsticks. The Jonin looked up from his book, bento sitting empty in the grass next to him. They hadn't even seen him eat it. Why are you having us run so many evasion drills? They hadn't last time, if memory served. Well, you want to be Chunin, don't you? He asked rhetorically. If you get hit by a stray kunai or shuriken, your ninja career can be ended just like that, and you'll never be promoted. Genin aren't supposed to be in the line of fire though, sensei, Sakura pointed out dryly. It was sort of hypocritical though, considering the missions that they had gone on in their Genin days, or will have gone on. All the better for you then, Kakashi-sensei said. You'll be ahead of the curve. For some reason, all 3 genin had sneaking suspicion that wasn't the reason at all. But none of them had the courage to bring it up. They didn't want to have to run laps around Konoha after all. So when do we start missions? Sasuke asked, changing the topic. It was true, for the last week since they had become genin, they hadn't taken a single D rank. Which could become a real problem if they didn't get the wave mission because of it. Do you want to start on them? Kakashi-sensei asked, raising an eyebrow. All 3 of them nodded. Ma, all right then, the Jonin sighed. We start tomorrow. Now finish up your bentos. I have a few more exercises I'd like you to do today. At the mention of more of Kakashi-sensei's exercises, the 3 let out a long, unanimous groan. It would be a long time before Kakashi-sensei let them go. He'd had them doing drills and exercises until the sun had begun to set. And even then it was only because Sakura couldn't physically stand, under her own power, due to exhaustion. So Kakashi-sensei had dismissed them and said to meet at the missions office the following day at 8, but knowing him that meant 11 or later before taking Sakura home. That left the two boys to make their way back to their own apartments on their own. So there Naruto was, wandering through the streets in Konoha lost in thought. He didn't particularly want to do D ranks again, but knowing he had to do they could get the wave mission took precedence over his feelings. But still, painting fences for hours on end sucked. Because he wasn't paying attention to his surroundings, Naruto managed to walk face first right into someone's back. Oof. The person he'd walked into jolted, turning around to face his assailant. Hey, watch where you're, Naruto. Naruto pauses from rubbing his nose. He knew that voice. Looking up, he saw a young face with a scar running across the nose, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Iruka-sensei. He gasped. His brain short-circuited for a moment while he took in the sight of his teacher. Emotions he couldn't discern suddenly started selling up inside him upon seeing the man, and it was all Naruto could do to stop his eyes from watering. The Chunin in question simply broke out into a grin. Wow, Naruto, I haven't seen you in ages, he smiled. But you really should watch where you're. Oof. The rest of his sentence was cut off by Naruto wrapping him in a bone-crushing hug. Iruka laughed good-naturedly, accepting the sudden form of affection. It hasn't been that long, Naruto. It really hadn't, for either of them. Naruto had seen him just before leaving for the war front, and Iruka had just seen on team assignment day. So it had only been roughly a week. But damn it if it didn't feel like forever. I know, Naruto said as he pulled away quickly, face turning red from embarrassment. Most people didn't hug their teachers after all. Even if their teachers told them they thought of them as a little brother, or bought them ramen. Or just cared for them in general, more than what could be considered normal. I just, missed you was all. It's all right, Iruka chuckled, smiling warmly. I'll admit to having missed you. The academy is so peaceful without your pranks, it's almost mind-numbing. Oh, right, pranks. Naruto hadn't pulled any in years. Guess you're just gonna have to get used to it, was all he managed to reply with. And if his smile seemed a little too forced, well, Iruka didn't call him out. Say, do you want to get ramen? I haven't had any for a little bit, and we haven't even celebrated you becoming an official genin yet. This time Naruto's grin became authentic, stretching wide across his face. Let's do it, you know. It had been a long time since Naruto had had ikirakus. So it wasn't surprising when he finished off his first bowl in under a minute before readily starting on his second, slurping down the wonderfully yummy noodles with the same amount of vigor. Well, it wasn't surprising for him, Iruka on the other hand. Whoa, slow down there, the Chunin cautioned, watching with mild alarm at the speed his student ate. The ramen isn't going anywhere. Swallowing the bean sprouts and Naruto maki he'd shoved in his mouth, Naruto turned to face Iruka. Yeah, but I haven't had it in forever, you know. Iruka shot him a disbelieving look. We had some the other week, he stated. That's right, Naruto thought to himself. They'd had some after Iruka made him a genin. He'd forgotten about that. Yeah, like I said, Naruto said, trying to play it off. Forever. Iruka didn't seem to think anything of it and merely rolled his eyes, smiling fondly despite himself. Well, just remember you need to eat fruits and vegetables too. You can't live solely off ramen. I know that, sensei, Naruto retorted. Which was apparently the wrong thing to say. Raising an eyebrow, Iruka turned back to look at him. Did you just agree with me on nutrition? He asked, dumbfounded. Naruto trailed off. Yeah. There was a pregnant pause from Iruka while the man appeared to collect his thoughts. Oh god, had Naruto said something out of character? Would Iruka get suspicious? Instead, the Chunin just blinked. Then a pleased look broke across his features. Wow, Naruto. You're really growing up, huh? Naruto blinked. I'm proud of you, he went on to say, causing a warm feeling to spread in Naruto's chest. A feeling he'd only really felt when he was Jiraiya or Kakashi-sensei in their later years. It felt like pride except, not. Then, breaking his train of thought, Iruka said, just don't grow up too fast. 'Cause then I'll miss my little ball of energy. This little ball of energy wasn't going anywhere, Naruto thought obstinately. Unfortunately for Iruka though, he had already grown up. Unlike last time, Kakashi-sensei made them do D ranks until the sun had set. And by now, all three of them had come to an agreement that the only reason he was doing this was because they beat him in the bell test. Geez, how petty could a person get? Apparently, the answer was very. They had done so many D ranks around the village in the past week and a half that old man Hokage let out a long-suffering sigh every time Kakashi-sensei dragged them into the mission office. He wasn't the only one. Iruka had started wearing a pained, pitiful expression seeing them so dirty and tired, but wisely kept his mouth shut about it. The three genin would have complained, but they knew that the more D ranks they went on, the higher the chance of the Hokage granting them the wave escort mission. So they kept their mouths shut and bore it through. Then finally, one day, they got the Tora mission. Finally, Naruto exclaimed upon exiting the office. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw his sensei shoot him a confused look behind his book. I just mean, it's something better than weeding gardens and stuff, Naruto hurried to say, trying to cover his mistake. Kakashi-sensei raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Naruto counted that as a win. Sakura, however, did not. She elbowed him in the ribs, probably harder than necessary, before shooting him a threatening look, one that told him to shut up immediately. Sorry, he grumbled out. This seemed to appease her, as she rolled her eyes before hurrying up to walk next to Sasuke. She had been trying for the past 2 weeks to mend their relationship, because apparently neither one had gotten over the other trying to kill them. Of course, to everyone else who knew them, it just looked like Sakura was absorbed in her crush on the Uchiha like always, which, being fair, might have also been true. But by now it wasn't just a crush anymore. To be honest, Naruto didn't know what it was. And he wasn't about to ask either. Naruto. Naruto looked up at Sakura, who had just hissed at him, and saw her beckoning him to join her and Sasuke. Confused, he picked up the pace until he was walking in sync with them. I was just talking with Sasuke, she said. And we agreed that if we get assigned the wave mission today that we'll meet somewhere later to go over our plan for it. What do you think? Naruto blinked, surprised. He had never included in plans before, so this was somewhat shocking. Shaking off the feeling, he quickly nodded to show his assent. Sure, but meet where? Sakura shrugged. Same place as always. So the memorial stone, Naruto thought. Alright, he said. I'll be there. The mission went as it had before. They had Tora at the expense of Naruto getting scratched to hell and back. Then he'd made a fuss at the mission office and demanded AC rank. The only difference was that this time Sakura and Sasuke, in his own, broody way, agreed with him, pressing for AC rank mission as well. For some reason the Hokage seemed relieved by their outburst and admitted that he'd been expecting them to ask for one for some time, considering how hard Kakashi-sensei was driving them with D ranks. He'd agreed and they'd been given AC rank. And it had been the wave mission. Everything was going to plan. So that night, Naruto left his warm apartment and tracked all the way out to the memorial stone, trusting his feet to get him there more than his eyes. When he got there, the other two were already waiting. Alright, we're all here now, he said Sakura say. He joined them at the obelisk and they sat down in a small circle. For a long while it was quiet, no one knowing where to start. Sakura decided to take the initiative and start them off. Tomorrow's the wave mission. It was said with a tone that was heavy and harrowing, not unlike that of a sentence. None of them had spoken about it, but they all knew the implications. This was the mission that truly started them on their shinobi careers. They'd had a first-hand look into how the shinobi world really operated. How dirty it was, how cruel it could be. It had also helped shape them as people. Naruto had learned the value of protecting his precious people while Sasuke had gained his Sharingan. Sakura hadn't taken much away from it though. Her change had really started in the Chunin exams. But the problem with this now though, was that they'd already done it. But no one else knew that, thus their dilemma. Should we maybe tell Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked nervously, looking at the other two for a reaction. Sakura bit her lip in thought while Sasuke retained the pensive look he always wore. I don't think so, Sakura finally said. We need him at the top of his game for this, and if we tell him, she trailed off, the implication clear on her face. Naruto gave a mute nod. He remembered what had happened to their sensei when he, Naruto, and Guy discovered the masked man was actually his previously dead teammate, Obito Uchiha. He had never seen fear on his sensei's face before that moment. If they told him all they knew about the future, there was no telling what would happen. So we don't tell him, Naruto surmised. Not yet anyway. He was met with a nod from Sakura and contemplative silence from Sasuke. So, that's decided, Sakura managed. But what now? Do we just let things play out as they did before? I mean, it ended well, but things definitely could have gone better. Naruto didn't even have to think before responding. Haku, he said. I don't want him to die. Zabuza either. Haku and Zabuza were the enemy, Sasuke cut in harshly. If they don't die there's no telling what else they might do, or who they might kill. Haku was innocent, Naruto argued. And Zabuza isn't a monster. You weren't awake when he killed Gato, but I saw it in his eyes. We can reach him if we try. An annoying huff escaped the Uchiha, followed by something that looked like a dismissive gesture. Sasuke, Naruto tried warningly. We're not going to kill them. We'll see about that, he said coldly. Naruto's fists clenched on top of his knees, and it was only when Sakura put her hand on his arm that he unclenched them. Getting into an argument wouldn't help anyone right now. Not if Sasuke was going to be an obstinate ass. Let's figure out the Haku Zabuza thing later, guys, Sakura said, ever the peacekeeper. Right now we should focus on how we're going to approach the mission. A challenging look was shared between Naruto and Sasuke for a long few moments before one of them relented. Naruto sighed, looking away. Alright, he said, let's get to work. The sun was shining brightly that morning, cheerful and warm. The coldness from the night was quickly being washed away by the warm mid-April breeze, giving the village a sense of peacefulness and contentment. For Team 7, however, it was another matter. They were stood in front of the village gates, backpacks on, papers exchanged with the guards, and by all intents and purposes, ready to go. Except there was one teeny tiny problem with the whole matter, one that would postpone any thought of getting on the road. Seriously, Naruto grounded, kicking at the dirt in annoyance. I thought for sure he wouldn't be late this time. Kakashi-sensei was very, very late. Their sensei always has a habit of being late, this was known. But surprisingly, over the last few weeks of him leading their team, he had cut back the time immensely. Of course it had also led to him pushing them harder than anything they'd ever experienced, but still. He hadn't been that late. Today though, that was not the case. It's almost like he's making up for lost time, Sakura commented dryly. Wait, Tazuna interrupted, a startled expression adorning his face. You're telling me this is a common occurrence? We've had to wait 5 hours before, was all Sakura said. Tazuna sweet-dropped. As amusing as the sight the bridge builder made was, Naruto couldn't bother to spare it any attention. Nerves had been building up inside him all night. What if their plan didn't work? What if it made things worse? What if? The thoughts wouldn't stop. And Kakashi-sensei being later than usual wasn't helping. They were on a timetable after all. Suddenly, good morning, my cute little monsters. There stood Kakashi-sensei, hands in his pockets, backpack on, and slouching like he didn't give a damn. You're late. Kakashi-sensei had the gall to look surprised. Am I? It's 11, is it not? Yeah, but we were supposed to meet at 9, Sakura supplied, annoyed because she knew full well that he'd known that, and was only doing this to be an ass. God, she missed their Kaka-sensei. The one who was a little more real with them and wasn't as late to things. Unfortunately that was still a few years down the line. Oops, he said, giving them all an innocent eye smile. All three genin and bridge builder gave him deadpan stares of disbelief. Well, Kakashi-sensei said, clapping his hands together. Time's a waste of. Let's get going. Hiking his backpack up onto his shoulders, Naruto turned to face his teammates with a determined look in his eyes. Their ninjas' careers began with this mission, and the weight of that wasn't lost on them. They stepped out of the gate, 3 genin, a jonin, and a bridge builder, all walking towards danger. The wave mission had begun. Chapter 7. They had been walking for near on 3 hours before the demon brothers from Kiri decided to show up. And, just like last time, they attacked Kakashi-sensei first, using their chains to rip him apart before going after Tazuna. Unlike last time however, they were ready for it. Sasuke, now! Naruto shouted, tossing the boy a length of ninja wire. He caught it and the pair ran forward, wire stretched taut between them. Sakura meanwhile bolted toward Tazuna and took up a defensive stance in front of him, kunai in hand and ready. The brothers noticed and jumped back to avoid being cloth-lined, just the way they had planned it. Dropping the ninja wire, Naruto summoned 10 clones and shot towards one of the brothers while Sasuke headed for the other. Their hope was to distract them by forcing them away from each other, thereby stretching their chain out until they went too far and tripped themselves. Naruto pushed his opponent back into the tree line with a flurry of kicks and punches. But instead of jumping back, he detached and shot his clawed gauntlet straight towards Naruto. The boy leapt to the side, only for the gauntlet to swing back around, ensnaring him in the cable. Fuck. The demon brother started to reel in the gauntlet, and unfortunately that meant he came with it. He squirmed to try to get out of it, but his arms were stuck. Damn it, he shouted. Naruto, duck. Naruto didn't even hear who had said it, but using his legs, he pushed against the tree in front of him, performing a semi-successful backflip that ended with him on the ground while a volley of shuriken and kunai sailed above him. A dull thunk followed. Something toppled over. Then silence. Naruto took that moment of silence to catch his breath, all the air having been knocked out of him from his ungraceful landing. Ow, he groaned. Turning his head to see where the Kiri ninja was, he looked in the direction he presumed he'd landed. In his place he saw a blood-soaked body covered in kunai and shuriken. It wasn't moving. Naruto. Someone was running up to him and grabbing his shoulders, helping to sit him upright. Looking up he saw Kakashi-sensei's worried face. Immediately his sensei started to untangle the cable from the gauntlet, all the while appearing to look him over for injuries. I'm fine, sensei, he said, shrugging off the cables once they were sufficiently loosened. Kakashi-sensei made no move to show he'd heard. Those were Chunin from Kiri, he said instead. The demon's brothers, known for their use of poison. Well, I didn't get cut or anything, he told him. See. He held up his hands for emphasis. Kakashi-sensei gave him an unimpressed look for his troubles. Naruto huffed in annoyance before scrambling to his feet, Kakashi-sensei lending a hand to help him. Sensei. He heard Sakura call to them. He looked over to see her rushing toward the tree line, med kit out and ready. Is Naruto hurt? No, we're fine here, Sakura, their sensei said, waving her off. Her shoulders slumped in relief before she turned back to someone else, presumably Sasuke. When Naruto and Kakashi-sensei made it back to the road, Naruto was surprised to see just how gory it was. This brother's body wasn't as mutilated by weapons as the others, but it was still gruesome. Your first kill, Sasuke, his sensei hummed from his side. I'm impressed. Well, Naruto grimaced. From a certain point of view. They were after the client, Sasuke said simply, not even fazed by his first apparent murder. Well, good job. He nodded to the boy before turning to the bridge builder. Now, Tazuna, he said, voice turning cold. We should talk. Somehow, by some miracle. They convinced Kakashi-sensei to let them complete the mission. And Naruto didn't even have to stab his hand to do it. Their sensei was much more reluctant to agree because he'd had to save Naruto from being gutted by one of the demon brothers. Naruto disagreed on that front, insisting he would have been fine. The side-eye spoke enough words to shut down any argument. Either way, they had still gotten him to agree, and were now on their way to the land of waves. Once they'd exited the boat that had taken them there, every member of Team 7 was on high alert. They had won one battle, yes, but there was still one more to go before they arrived in Tazuna village. The one with Zabuza. Yet despite knowing he would attack them somewhere between the boat and village, none of them could remember exactly where. And it was putting them all on edge. Walking at the front of the party, Naruto was palming a kunai nervously while Sakura hung back behind Tazuna in case any projectiles came his way. Sasuke had taken point and was having a hard time not activating his Sharingan. He ached for his blade, the one he'd gotten from Orochimaru, so as to feel some semblance of reassurance. But as it was, he didn't have it yet, so he had to settle for kunai like the rest of them. Awfully quiet, you three, Kakashi noted from the side. Just focusing, sensei, Sakura replied tersely. And that was the end of that conversation. They walked for a little while longer, nerves growing with each step. They were so high-strung that even the rustle of bushes could have set them off, which was exactly what happened. Naruto reacted first and threw his kunai, where it hit its target with a sickening thunk. After a moment's thought, Naruto realized that couldn't have been Zabuza. Upon investigation, he found he was right. Ah man, he sighed, pulling the now-dead rabbit out of the underbrush. It was a snow hare, winter coat still on despite it being spring. He vaguely remembered scaring a rabbit last time. But he hadn't killed it. Just went to show how much his aim had improved over the years. Geez, Sakura sighed, clutching her chest. That scared the shit out of me. Naruto opened his mouth to apologize, but was cut off by Kakashi-sensei's sudden cry. Get down, he shouted. Acting out of reflex, Naruto threw himself onto the ground, watching Sakura tackle Tazuna and Kakashi-sensei do the same to Sasuke. Not a second later a giant sword came spinning over their heads, lodging itself squarely in a tree behind Naruto. It would have surely decapitated all of them had they remained standing. But that wasn't the thought going through Naruto's head. Zabuza, was all he thought. The fight with Zabuza had gone much the same as it had last time. Chakra exhausted sensei included. It had been frustrating being forced to the sidelines again, save for the Fuma Shuriken move. Even though they all knew Kakashi-sensei would win, it was infuriating not being able to help. They had the skills. They had the knowledge. But it was useless when they couldn't do anything with them. It made them all feel useless. The whole team had been uncharacteristically quiet for the remainder of the journey to Tezuna's house. But no one had made a comment of it. Tezuna might have assumed it was all due to the very traumatizing event that had just occurred. But the rest knew they each were all caught up in their own, frustrated thoughts. They had been forced to stay out of the battle this time. What if the same happened next battle? They couldn't accept being forced to sit back when they knew they could change things. They had agreed that they shouldn't mess with the Zabuza battle much before they'd left. The world didn't see them yet as the incredible powerhouses they were. And as such they had to play the part. They had known that. But that had been before. Before they had felt it. The powerlessness, the helplessness, the frustration. They'd known that was how it was going to be. But there's a difference between knowing and knowing. And it made all of them feel frustrated beyond compare. Because how could they change anything when they had to be stupid helpless genin? How? Here we are. Tezuna's voice broke them out of their reverie and back into the present. They found themselves standing in front of a quaint wooden house set into a pier. Water lapped at the posts holding it up below them, the salty smell of the sea shifting calmly around them. It's not much to what you guys are used to, I suppose, the bridge builder continued, stroking his goatee thoughtfully. But it's home, and where the four of you will be staying until I get the bridge built. It's perfect, Sakura supplied, speaking up for the first time since the battle. She offered him a kind smile. It was weak, slightly strained, but obviously sincere. Thank you, Tezuna. The architect smiled back. Course. Now let's get your teacher set up inside before you drop him. And that was that. Chapter 8. Hey, should I pull his mask down? What? Why? Because then we would finally get to see what he's hiding under there. Naruto, you can't just take advantage of someone like that while they're unconscious. I'm not taking advantage. You want to see it too. I know you do. He felt a hand reaching forward to grab at the fabric and immediately his senses went into high alert. His hand shot out and grabbed the offender's wrist. Try it again, and you'll be doing D ranks until you're 20, Kakashi threatened, eyes still shut. His student let out a loud nervous gulp before yanking his hand back. As I thought, he painstakingly opened his eyes and saw two of his students staring at him with their own, clearly shocked. Good. Sakura was seated behind Naruto, legs folded beneath her properly while Naruto was hovering by him, having escaped the possible wrath of lowering his mask. So that was two students accounted for. Now where was the third? Sasuke is taking watch right now, Sakura reported, noticing what he was thinking. We're at Tezuna's house with his daughter and grandchild. You've only been out for a day. Kakashi sighed internally in relief. After the battle they had just endured, he didn't want his genin to be left without guidance for too long. They were shinobi, yes, but they were still scared little kids, genin who weren't prepared to handle an A-rank mission against rogue ninja assassins and crime lords. Though sometimes he did wonder. Also, Sakura piped up, bringing him back to the present. We were thinking about that hunter ninja, and how he just took Zabuza. It was really weird. Yes, it was, Kakashi agreed internally. He knew there was something off about that exchange. But he'd been too out of it to realize what. You're right, Sakura, he told her. She perked up at the affirmation. Hunter ninja usually desecrate their mark on the spot. And rarely did they use Senbon to kill, as they're more so used as poisoning and for targeting the nervous system. Naruto and Sakura blinked, appearing to take in the knowledge. He continued on. That is why it is my belief that Zabuza may still be alive. Immediately, Naruto exploded in a disbelieving outburst. What? Alive? How is that possible? You checked his pulse and everything. You said he was dead. He barely noticed it, but he saw Sakura refrain from rolling her eyes. Only just. Odd. Senbon, when used correctly, can make it appear as if the victim has died. I'll admit that the fake hunter ninja fooled me. Wow, a Jonin was fooled, a new voice said, breaking into the conversation. How often does that happen, I wonder? Looking up towards the doorway of the small room, Kakashi spotted Sasuke leaning against the doorframe, looking thoroughly bored. But when he looked closer, he saw a glimmer of mirth twinkling in his onyx eyes. So the Uchiha did have a lighter side. He made a mental note of that. We shinobi aren't perfect, he replied easily. We're only human after all. The Uchiha rolled his eyes, but said nothing. With some effort, Kakashi managed to sit up on his futon, much to Sakura's displeasure. You should be resting, sensei, and beckoned Sasuke in. The boy did as requested and joined them on the floor. Soon all his genin were sitting in a semicircle facing him, ready to hear whatever he had to say. So, as I said before, and I'll repeat for Sasuke, Zabuza is most likely alive. Before any of them could get another word in, he pressed on. But, given the nature of how he lost the battle, he'll likely be on bed rest for the next week. Which means Tazuna will most likely not be in harm's way. A sigh of relief escaped all three genin. Unfortunately, I will also need about a week to recover from chakra exhaustion. All three let out a groan. Fortunately, this also gives you three a week to get in some extra training so you're all more prepared for when he does show up again. Naruto was the first one to speak up. So what exactly do you have planned for us, you know? He asked skeptically. Ma, I'm glad you asked Naruto, I smiled. The three leaned in eagerly. I'll tell you what it is. They leaned in further. Tomorrow, had he a camera to capture the expressions they'd made, he would have had it framed and hanging on his wall for the rest of time. He loved messing with them. All three of his students were standing around in the clearing when he finally arrived on his crutches. Sasuke was brooding, as usual, Naruto was pacing impatiently, and Sakura was reading one of the books she'd brought along. Well, at one of them was being productive, he thought. Finally, Naruto cried, turning to face him. Are you gonna tell us what we're doing or what? Ma, patience Naruto, he said, waving him off. The blonde merely huffed loudly before folding his arms in a defiant motion. Fine, he sighed. I'll be teaching you how to walk up a tree. Wait for it, without using your hands. The reaction he got was not the one he was expecting at all. All three of his genin sweet dropped and gave him the most unimpressed looks in the world. More so than the ones he'd given Obito back in the genin days. Really, sensei? Sakura deadpanned. We already know how to do that. What? Last he checked they didn't teach that at the academy. Interesting, he said, trying to play off how surprised he was. You wouldn't mind showing me then, would you? All three seemed to let out a sigh of varying inflection before choosing a tree. And walking straight up it like they were just out for a casual stroll. Okay, not what he was expecting. Nevertheless, he could work around this. How about water walking? He challenged. Surely they couldn't do that, could they? Easy, Naruto declared, flipping back down to the ground. Kakashi felt his eye twitch in annoyance. Good lord, what was with these kids? Alright, fine, he finally said, voice straining. You're going to learn your elemental affinity, and work on perfecting a jutsu that matches that affinity over the course of the next week. I don't care if you already know some. Because at the rate they're going they just might, he thought bitterly. You're going to find a new one and master it. Easy enough, Sasuke said, jumping back to the ground as well. He was followed shortly after by Sakura, who also didn't seem overly impressed with the assignment. Well, we all know our affinities, right? She asked, looking around the group. The boys both nodded. Right, because why wouldn't they know their affinities? Why not have insane genin that can do crazy things like that? What did Kakashi ever do to deserve this? Actually, he'd rather that question not be answered. Alright then, he sighed, resisting the urge to pinch the bridge of his nose. List them off. You first, Broody. Lightning and fire. 2. Okay, well, he was an Uchiha after all. It was almost expected of him. Blondie. Wind. Naruto announced excitedly. That wasn't surprising. His mother was an Uzumaki, it was a common affinity among their clan. And one of Minato sensei's as well. Of course their son would get it. Pinky, your turn. Water and earth, she reported. Wait, what? The daughter of civilians, a girl with possibly less chakra than the average genin, had 2 affinities. And rare affinities at that. Or at least in the land of fire. You 3, he announced, glaring at them all with one eye. Are monsters. While messing with Kakashi sensei had been fun, it might not have been worth it considering what he had them do next. Sensei, how are we supposed to master a whole new jutsu in a week? Naruto complained, looking up from the scroll said sensei had handed him. It was a scroll for the air bullet technique. An A-rank jutsu no genin should be learning no matter how skilled they were. Then again, he wasn't really a genin. But even so, it would still take forever to learn. Especially when he had to learn it from a scroll. He was better with one-on-one work, not reading, thank you very much. Ma, I'm sure you'll figure it out, Naruto, his sadistic sensei said, giving him one of his trademark eye smiles. But not a nice one. One that meant he was going to do or say something incredibly awful to the recipient. Instead of responding, Naruto just scowled and went back to his scroll. They were still sitting in the same clearing from earlier, but now they were all just sitting around in a loose circle, all reading their respective scrolls. Sakura had actually already finished hers and was working on hand signs. She was learning one Kakashi-sensei had copied from an Iwa ninja some years ago. And it was perfect for her. Earth style. Rock Fist was just the jutsu for her. It incorporated raw strength and chakra control. Like medical ninjutsu, except that it had the opposite effect on the recipient. Actually, it really wasn't like medical ninjutsu, Naruto thought in retrospect. But it suited Sakura all the same. In fact, speaking of which, Earth style, Rock Fist. The shout echoed through the forest right before the sound of a tree splitting in half did. Naruto watched with mild horror as his teammate literally punched a tree clean through with her new jutsu, falling the two pieces in opposite directions. There was utter silence for about 10 seconds before Kakashi-sensei said, "Good work, Sakura. You get the rest of the week off." "What?" Naruto cried, jumping to his feet. "Seriously, sensei? Well, she did master the jutsu. There would be no point in her doing so for the rest of the week." "Yeah, but," Naruto struggled to come up with a counter-argument. "She's Sakura." As if that explained everything. "My statement still stands," the man responded, with a rather cool edge to his tone. Naruto had to bite his tongue to keep from swearing out loud. How could this be the same man that taught him the Rasenshuriken? Or even the same one who was about to be promoted to 6th Hokage? He was so damn petty. HMPH, fine, he finally grumbled, pouting for extra effect. That was something 12-year-old him did, right? "But I'll master my jutsu before the bastard does," he said, despite knowing full well the Uchiha was easily Jonin level and could probably learn his fire jutsu just as fast as Sakura had. But Naruto ignored that little detail and exclaimed, "Even if it takes me all week." "Whatever," came the dry reply. "Well, have fun you too," Kakashi-sensei waved. I crinkled in a cheery smile. "Sakura and I will be at the house when you two finish up." And with that, the two turned and started heading out of the forest. Before they left, however, Sakura shot a smirk over her shoulder at the boys, waving her fingers in a condescending goodbye. Rude. Chapter 9. As it turned out, Sasuke did master his jutsu quickly. Although it really shouldn't have been a surprise, considering how intensely he'd trained with Orochimaru in the 3 years he had been gone. Naruto on the other hand didn't have as much experience with his affinity, and thus had a harder time mastering it. He'd summoned some shadow clones to help out, but because he was on duty, he couldn't afford to waste as much chakra on them like he could have back in Konoha when mastering it for the first time. "Are you done yet?" Sasuke drawled from the edge of the clearing where he was sat under a tree. It was amazing he had stayed at all after he'd gotten his jutsu, Dragon Flame Caterwall, down. He had been cold and disinterested with everyone ever since coming back, so Naruto was surprised when he'd offered to stay behind. He wasn't about to complain though. He'd worked so hard to win his best friend back, so he wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Why? Got something better to do. That of course didn't stop him from replying to everything Uchiha said with dry remarks. What could he say? It was habit. "Yeah, I do," Sasuke said. "Like eat. I don't know about you but I'm starving." Now that he thought about it, Naruto was feeling kind of hungry himself. "Alright, let's get going," he said, dispelling his clones. Their memories rushed back to him immediately but he set them aside to rifle through later. The walk back to the house was a quiet one. There was a tense atmosphere between them, but not enough so that either one wanted to address it. Naruto realized then that they had never really talked officially about what had happened when Sasuke had come back to help them in the war. He'd just showed up, announced that he would become Hokage, and teamed up with them. Naruto wanted to believe that that meant that everything was back to normal and that Sasuke really was back, but there was always this tension when he was with them that told him that wasn't quite the case. But so far nothing bad had happened, so Naruto could only hope that meant something good could. Knocking on Tezuna's front door, it opened to welcome them to the lovely smell of curry and rice. Right on cue their stomachs growled. "Someone must be hungry," Tsunami said as she welcomed them in. Naruto almost tripped over himself getting his sandals off, he was so excited to eat. "Food's not going anywhere," she teased, noticing his enthusiasm. After seating himself, he said a quick, "Itadakimasu." He immediately started shoveling rice and curry into his mouth. "Naruto," Sakura gasped. "Slow down. You're gonna hurt yourself." I'm hungry," he managed to say through a full mouth. "Won't help if you throw it all up again," she scolded, green eyes giving him a dangerous look. The medic side of her was surfacing, he could tell. And that ironically enough usually promised pain. Maybe it was better to do as she said. Sorry, Sakura, Naruto apologized bashfully, scratching the back of his neck. He picked his chopsticks back up and continued at a more sedate pace. Ma, now that we're settled, Kakashi-sensei piped up, somehow already finished with his meal. How did training go, boys? Naruto groaned under his breath as he continued to feed rice into his mouth. I mastered the technique you gave me, sensei, Sasuke reported dully, picking through his own portions. Good. Naruto. He mumbled something under his breath in response, which went unheard to the rest of the group. Come again. Kakashi-sensei pressed. An exasperated huff escaped Naruto before he spoke up. I said I haven't gotten it yet, he admitted. Then, perking up, he turned to his sensei with a bright smile. But if I use my shadow clones, I'm sure I'll get it down in no time. Shadow clones. Kakashi-sensei echoed, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Oh, that's right, Naruto figured. Kakashi-sensei hadn't yet had the idea to use shadow clones to decrease training time. Oh well, maybe he could tell him and take the credit for it. It would definitely make him look smart. Yeah, 'cause like, when they dispel I get their memories, you know, Naruto explained. So if I have a lot of them practicing a jutsu, I get more experience and decrease the time it would take for me to learn it. Kakashi-sensei blinked in surprise. That's actually quite smart, he admitted. Naruto smiled for the praise, laughing internally at the irony of it all. The moment was ruined, however, by a young voice coming from the doorway. You all are pathetic. Naruto frowned and looked up to see who had spoken. He was unsurprised to find it was Inari, who was sitting across the table from him. Naruto hadn't even realized he was there, he had been so quiet. His hands were clenching onto his chopsticks so hard Naruto was afraid they might break. A scowl was plastered on his face, hardening his features into a grim state rather than the cute, chubby one they should have been for his age. What do you mean? Naruto asked guilelessly. Inari's scowl deepened, but he looked up from the table anyway to address him. You all are training and planning, but it's pointless. You'll never win, so you should just go home. Inari, Tsunami gasped. It's true, he shot back. They're just wasting their time. Ma, surely you don't really believe that, Kakashi-sensei spoke up, tone easy and laid back in hopes of de-escalating the situation. We are shinobi after all. It doesn't matter, Gato will just hire better ones to kill you and then us, he shot back. There's no point fighting. Naruto blinked, taken aback by the raw pain in his voice. Of course there is, Naruto frowned. That's the only way you can make a difference. No, he takes everything. You don't know what it's like to live here. You don't know what it's like to lose someone. You don't know our pain. You can never know, so you should just leave. I know exactly how you feel, kid, he thought to himself, memories playing in his mind. Jiraiya's grave, a slashed headband, Konoha destroyed, and 2 names carved into a memorial stone. I know better than anyone. But I'm still fighting, because I have to. You'll never beat Gato, you'll just die. Years ago, Naruto would have just gotten mad. He would have yelled right back. Would have acted like the stupid kid he had been. But now, then that's what we'll do, he said firmly. Inari sucked in a shocked breath, tears halting for a second while he stared up at Naruto wide-eyed. If we die fighting Gato, then we die, Naruto continued calmly, eyes hard and jaw set. In his hands he clenched his chopsticks so hard he thought they might snap. But I won't run from it, because I can't. I have to face threats head-on, because if I don't, then they win and nothing gets better. Pain would have won. His village would have been destroyed. His sensei would be dead. And yeah, you could lose something precious because of it. Like his parents. Like Lord Third. Like Jiraiya. Like Neji. But it's worth it in the end, you know. Because you might win. And that makes it all worth it, right? Inari blinked, unshed tears shining in his eyes. And yeah, kid, he continued. I do know how you feel, and it sucks. I just stopped pitying myself and decided to do something about it. It wasn't exactly the kindest thing to say, but tough love had worked last time, so maybe it would this time as well. Immediately after he said it, Inari's face twisted into an angry scowl, and the boy pushed off from the table and stormed outside, slamming the door behind him. Despondent, Naruto turned back to his rice, hunger forgotten. He figured he wouldn't get through to Inari, but there had been some part of him that had hopped. I'm sorry about Inari, Tsunami apologized. He hasn't been himself these past few months. Ever since, she trailed off, eyes going misty at the memory of her loss. Ever since. Sakura pressed lightly, leaning forward. The 3 of them already knew the story, but it wouldn't do any harm to ask again. A few years ago, Tazuna started, answering for his daughter. Inari met a man named Kaiza. He was considered a hero among our people for deeds he had done in the past. Eventually Inari came to see him as a father figure. He was part of our family. So what happened? Sakura continued, in a tone that was convincingly earnest. When Gato arrived, Tazuna said darkly. He killed Kaiza for standing up against him. Killed him in front of the whole town. Including Inari, Tsunami added in a quiet voice. A deadly silence settled over the table at her words. Everyone had a grim expression on their face, even Kakashi-sensei. No kid should have to see someone slaughtered before them, especially their father. Ever since then, Tazuna continued. He's been withdrawn, closed off. And apparently now the concept of heroes is idiotic to him. Naruto huffed, folding his arms over his chest in a semi-defiant manner. Then we'll just have to convince him it's not, he said stubbornly. Tazuna gave him an incredulous look. And how does a squirt like you plan on doing that? He asked. Because, Naruto said, flashing him a wide smile. I'm gonna be Hokage one day, you know. And only heroes can become Hokage. Tazuna still looked unconvinced, but out of the corner of his eye, Naruto saw Sakura giving him a faint smile, and he knew immediately what she was thinking. Naruto was already a hero. Now he just had to prove it. Wind style, air bullets. Naruto shouted before trying for the 14th time since dinner to produce the wind jutsu depicted in the scroll. Once again, all that happened was a strong eruption of wind hitting a tree before the jutsu sputtered out and he was left with nothing. Damn it, he cursed, kicking at the ground. All around him, copies of himself were having similar luck. Some had managed to progress further than others, but overall it was about the same. Alright, he sighed. Time to take a break. With a single hand sign, he sat down and released the clones, waiting for all their memories to rush back to him. As expected, the experience left him drained, and he was glad he had chosen to sit. He'd only had about 30 clones helping him, so the overall recoil wasn't nearly as bad as other times, but it was still a lot. Closing his eyes, he leaned his head back against the tree he was resting against. Why was it so hard for him to learn a new jutsu? He had his affinity down, he was molding his chakra exactly the way it said to Inti scroll. So why was he having so much difficulty? Naruto. A new voice said. Naruto opened his eyes and looked up in surprise to see Sakura walking towards him. She was rubbing her bare shoulders to stave off the chilly night air, but the smile she was wearing told him she didn't mind. Hey Sakura, he greeted, pushing himself up into a better sitting position. What are doing out here? I know how hard you train, she said, sitting herself down next to him. Thought you might need someone to keep an eye on you. Naruto smiled softly, mentally agreeing with her. Did he have a tendency to work himself to the bone? Just promise me you won't try to feed me those mud balls of yours, he teased, earning an indigent squawk from her. They're not mud balls, they're highly nutritional food pills. She exclaimed. Not even Sai liked them, he chuckled in response. And he barely has emotions. Oh shut up, she moaned. Naruto only cackled in response. They sat that way for some time, bickering lightheartedly and laughing at nothing. Until, finally, Naruto piped up. For real though, he said, tone turning serious. What's going on? There was silence on her end for a few moments, filled only by her absently picking at her sleeves. She had only just gotten her new outfit a few days before they left for Wave, so she was still getting used to it. Finally, after some time, she spoke up. It's hard, you know. She said in a quiet voice, eyes staring ahead into the darkness. Being back here, seeing everyone, but no one recognizes you. A pause. Not really, anyway. It's lonely, he agreed. And so weird, she continued, voice strained. I care so much about all these people, people I shouldn't even know, people who barely know me. She let out a frustrated groan and leaned forward to rest her head in her hands. It's all just so confusing. I know how you feel, he said somberly. The Pinkett looked up to see his eyes downcast, staring at his feet. The QB, was all she said. It didn't need further explanation, as they both knew the connotations. Before the Chunin exams, before he'd tried to rescue Sasuke the first time around, he'd been shunned and secluded because of him being the QB's Jinchuriki. That pain had faded over the years though as he gained more friends. But now that they were in the past, he was back to square one. No friends, and spiteful villagers. I'm a hero to Konoha, he said. But they don't even know it. I'm sorry, Sakura said. I wish it could be different. Me too, he sighed quietly. Me too. She didn't say anything, but Sakura scooted over and leaned over until her head was resting on his shoulder in a comforting gesture, hands entangled in his own. It wasn't a romantic gesture, far from it. But it was nice. The two of them alone, just being there for each other. For what it's worth, she whispered softly. I'm glad we have a chance to change things. Even if it means starting all over. Yeah, Naruto agreed, thinking about all those he hasn't lost yet, about everything he had the chance to change. I guess so. Chapter 10. Naruto woke up tired and laying on the ground. He'd pushed himself hard training after his talk with Sakura. She had stayed with him the whole time, watching him and making sure he didn't overexert himself. She'd fallen asleep at some point though, leaning up against a tree. When Naruto noticed this, he took off his jacket and had laid it over her so she wouldn't get cold before going back to training. And eventually, he himself had fallen asleep. He was woken up by someone gently touching his shoulder. Opening his eyes, he saw a pretty face hovering over his own, framed by long, dark hair. His heart clenched. Haku, sorry to wake you, he said kindly. But I didn't think you would find it comfortable to be sleeping out here. He stretched out a hand to offer help up. Blinking, Naruto took it and sat up. Off by the trees, he heard rustling from where Sakura had fallen asleep, followed by a startled gasp upon her seeing a stranger so close to them. Good morning, miss, he greeted, smiling in her direction. Hi, she stammered out, trying to figure out who he was. Since she had never really met Haku before, she couldn't place him as easily. I'm sorry for interrupting you too, he said with a smile. I just came out here to gather herbs and found you two asleep. Then, oh, you two are shinobi, he said, noticing their headbands, as if he hadn't already noticed it before. You must be very strong. Yeah, I guess you could say that, Sakura said wearily, standing up to join them on the grass. Naruto's jacket was clutched in her hands now that she was awake, and she handed it back to him upon sitting down. I'm Sakura, and that's Naruto, she greeted, gesturing to him. Who are you? My name is Haku, he replied, giving them both a kind smile. Hi Haku, Sakura said, returning his smile. What kind of herbs do you need? She continued, eyeing Haku's partially full basket. I'm pretty good with medicines, so I might be able to help. Just these, he said, holding up what was in his basket. Sakura glanced at the herbs, her medical experience coming to the forefront of her mind and her features contorting in recognition. She wiped away the look, replacing it with a smile. Ah, I see, she said with just the slightest edge to her voice. What do you need them for? A fleeting spark of recognition flared in Haku's eyes, but he looked back down at the ground, to focus on the plants. A friend of mine was injured, I'm trying to help him recover. That's very noble of you to help, Sakura said. He's my precious person, Haku stated simply. Of course I'd help him. Wouldn't you do the same for yours? Sakura blinked, slightly dumbfounded. She had never realized the bond between Haku and Zabuza had been so close. Unsure of what to say, she went back to picking herbs. I would, Naruto stated, jabbing a thumb towards his chest. I'd never abandon my precious people. Haku's smile returned, kindness and warmth flowing back into his cheeks at the boy's words. Is that your dream? To protect them? He asked. Naruto scratched his chin thoughtfully. Was it his dream? In part, he supposed. He'd always wanted to be Hokage. But being Hokage meant protecting everyone. And having everyone be your precious people. I guess so, he shrugged. I've always dreamt of becoming Hokage, and the Hokage protects everyone, he said, reciting his thoughts. So I guess that is my dream. Is it yours? My dream is protect and serve my precious person, Haku replied soberly. Without him, I'm nothing. Off to the side, Sakura frowned. That can't be true, she countered. Your life isn't defined by one person. It's defined by you. Maybe, Haku replied. But it's true for me. Sakura frowned, eyes betraying sadness, but said nothing. What about you, miss? Haku continued. What is your dream? To protect my precious people, I suppose, she said dumbly, still put off by his last answer to her statement. I'm a medic, so I want to save people. Those are both noble goals, Haku told them warmly. I hope you are able to achieve them someday, both of you. A genuine smile, one that made its way to his eyes, appeared on the boy's face. Naruto stuck a thumb out in a thumbs-up gesture, broad smile plastered on his face. I will achieve it, you can count on that. I don't doubt it, Naruto, Haku chuckled. Then, dusting his kimono, he stood up, grabbing his now full basket of herbs. Now, I must return to my friend. Thank you both for helping me gather herbs. No problem, Sakura smiled. Hopefully we'll see each other around town. Maybe we'll even get to meet your friend if they're feeling better. she added. They would. 2 days from now. They already knew. Maybe, Haku agreed. Farewell Naruto, Sakura. It was a pleasure to meet you. Bye Haku, Naruto waved. Take care. And with that, the kimono-clad boy disappeared off into the trees. The two shinobi left behind sat together in silence for some time while they waited for the Kiri ninja to vanish completely. Then, just as they were sure he was gone, Sakura turned to Naruto. So that was Haku. Yeah. A sigh from Sakura. Oh boy, I don't want him to die. Naruto shifted where he sat, a small pit forming in his stomach at the thought. Yeah, he agreed. Me neither. The rest of the day was spent training for Naruto as he tried to get his jutsu down. He had made a lot of progress, and even managed to drill many holes into some poor trees. But the goal was to go clean through, and that hadn't yet happened. Sakura had remained at the house after breakfast, as had Sasuke, so Naruto was on his own. He was working with about 50 shadow clones, each one taking up a tree as target practice. But it still didn't feel like enough. There was something he was missing. If only he knew what. Having fun there. The sudden voice distracted him and caused him to lose focus, resulting in his next shot losing velocity and only making a small dent on the bark. Damn, he huffed, turning to see who'd spoken. He wasn't surprised to find Kakashi-sensei leaning against a tree that wasn't currently being used as a target, eyeing the area with mild interest. I see you're taking advantage of your shadow clones, he noted, looking around at the sea of orange. Oh, yeah, he replied. I'm still not getting anywhere though. Kakashi-sensei raised an eyebrow before pushing off from the tree. He no longer needed the crutches to get around, so he strolled on over to Naruto easily. Well, what are you doing? He asked, his tone mild. Naruto frowned, scrunching his face up in confusion. I'm doing what the scroll said, he supplied. What else should I be doing? Well, you could try looking at it from a different angle, he suggested in his annoyingly cocky voice. Naruto scowled in response. What kind of advice was that? He said as much. I mean trying to think of it differently, he said clarified, undeterred by Naruto's attitude. But to do that, I need to know. What are you doing now? Naruto opened his mouth to argue but Kakashi-sensei held up his hand to stop him. Yes, you're doing what the scroll said. But what is that exactly? Just read it yourself, Naruto grumbled. No, I want you to tell me, he said. God, why did he have to have such a frustrating sensei? In that moment Naruto would have killed to have a sensei like Kurenai or Asuma. Maybe even Guy. At least with them you actually knew where you stood or what they were talking about while they were teaching, if you could even call what Kakashi-sensei did teaching. It felt a lot more like lecturing. Fine, Naruto finally sighed. I'm building wind chakra in my chest and then exerting pressure so it shoots forward. Just like the scroll said. Ah, and are you building pressure before or after you've amassed wind chakra? After, I guess, he shrugged. Kakashi-sensei hummed pensively, looking him up and down in thought. Finally, he spoke up and said, next time, I want you to build up normal chakra first, enough to build a substantial amount of pressure, before you form any wind chakra. He nodded to himself. Can you do that? Naruto shrugged. I suppose. Kakashi-sensei gestured for him to do so. Turning back to the tree, Naruto built up the chakra just like his sensei said, holding it down to form pressure. Then he used change in chakra nature to form the wind chakra he'd need for the jutsu to work. With a few hand signs, he shot the bullets out of his mouth, hitting the tree squarely in the center. They drilled almost all the way through. Whoa, Naruto gasped, straightening up. Did you see that? I did, Kakashi-sensei replied coolly. Now this time, he continued. I want you to condense your wind chakra more so that the bullets have more effect. You got it, Naruto exclaimed, jumping back into position. He formed the chakra, built the pressure, condensed the wind, formed the hand signs, and then boom. The tree shattered at the base, splinters of bark flying everywhere. With a groan, the tree toppled over onto the ground, a loud crashing sound following its descent. Then, silence. That was awesome, Naruto suddenly shouted, jumping up and down with excitement. Did ya see that? I did that, you know. Like, it just toppled over, just like that, you know. I'm awesome. Kakashi-sensei watched the celebratory dance with mirth and pride sparkling in his eye. Hey, can I try that again? He asked, turning to his sensei. Kakashi-sensei shrugged in a, why not, gesture. Naruto grinned happily before going to do it again. And again, the same result happened. Yes, he shouted. He proceeded to continue his celebratory shouting as he jumped around the clearing. Ma, now that you've mastered your jutsu, Kakashi-sensei drawled, interrupting his jig. You should dispel your clones. No point in wasting any more chakra today. Oh, right, Naruto said, pausing his victory dance. With a single hand sign he dispelled them all. Only to topple over onto his face. But not before his sensei caught him. Right, Naruto groaned, wariness taking over his bones. Forgot about that drawback. Kakashi-sensei let out a short chuckle before hiking him up onto his back into a piggyback, arms hooked under his short legs. Ma, let's just get you back to the house, he said. Naruto would have agreed, but he was already drooling onto his shoulder, fast asleep. The next night, all three genin were gathered in the clearing for a meeting. Kakashi-sensei was taking watch at the house and was under the impression that the three had gone off to practice drills, when the reality was that they had needed to discuss the plan for the bridge battle the next day. Naruto was still reeling from having completed his jutsu, excited energy buzzing under his skin at seemingly all hours of the day. The other two found it annoying, but they didn't say much to make him stop. All right, Sakura said, breaking the silence. She always seemed to be the one to talk first at these meetings, so the other two often looked to her as their leader, of sorts. The role fit her very well. The bridge battle is tomorrow, she said. And I know we've sort of discussed this, but we really need to form a solid plan. Inari and his mom are going to be attacked, Naruto reported. So someone needs to stay behind to help them. I can do that, Sakura volunteered. Then afterwards I can go to the bridge to guard Tazuna. Sasuke nodded, agreeing. We should leave Zabuza to Kakashi-sensei, he said. So Naruto and I can fight Haku. Right, Naruto agreed. And we should try to detain him so he can't form those mirrors of his. They're a bitch to fight. Not with my Sharingan they're not, Sasuke said, throwing a satisfied smirk his way. Naruto scowled in response, but didn't take the bait any further. Whatever happens, Sakura cut in, diffusing the tension between them. Your goal is to make sure Haku doesn't leap in front of Kaka-sensei's Chidori. And making sure he doesn't form those ice mirrors that trap you too. Sasuke let out a frustrated huff, shocking the other two. Haku chose to take that Chidori, he said darkly. If he wants to kill himself, that's his problem. Sasuke, Naruto frowned. Saving the world means saving its people. And that's what we're doing, isn't it? The Uchiha shot him a dark look, Onyx eyes cold and unrelenting. The only person I care about saving is my brother, he said. And Haku is a rogue ninja. He should be killed just for that reason alone. Anger built up inside Naruto, and he suddenly found himself on his feet with clenched fists facing Sasuke. If that's true, then we should have killed you. You abandoned the village on your stupid revenge quest, after all. Sasuke's eyes flashed Sharingan red, the ears glowing in the dim light. Sensing the two seemed about to break into a fight, Sakura stood up and shoved them away from each other, reinforcing her movement with chakra for added effect. The both of you need to cool down, she exclaimed, glaring at them. We're not here to bicker over what happened in the past. We're here to complete a mission. She spoke, her eyes locked in a staring match with their own. Got it. Naruto muttered something in response while Sasuke remained quiet, but both nodded in reluctant assent. Good, she growled. Now, back to the plan. She sat back down and gestured for them to do the same. They complied, however reluctantly. Here's what we'll do when we get to the bridge. Chapter 11. That morning, the men of Team 7 left Sakura, Tsunami, and Inari behind while they escorted Tazuna to the bridge. They had laid out a plan last night, detailing it and going over it so many times, Naruto felt as though he'd just studied for one of Iruka-sensei's exams all over again. But Sakura had insisted they have it down, ignoring Naruto's complaints. The rest of the night had been filled with fitful sleep, nerves keeping all of them, except Sasuke, up. Hopefully, it wouldn't affect them in battle. You two seem awfully tense, Kakashi-sensei noted from behind them. Naruto only managed to give a stiff, half-hearted shrug. It's been a week, he said simply. You said that's how long it would take for Zabuza to recover. The implication of the rogue ninja preparing to attack them was clear. Ah, I see, was their sensei's somber response. Well, let's be on our guard then. The two boys nodded absently in assent. Not long after, they came upon the bridge. And the bloodbath it had become. Tazuna, get behind me, Kakashi-sensei snapped, immediately taking up a defensive position. Naruto, Sasuke, he ordered, shooting them a commanding look. Without having to hear any spoken order, the two jumped to flank Tazuna, kunai drawn and ready to use. A low chuckle reverberated through the air around them, mist slowly encroaching on their small group. Zabuza, Kakashi-sensei hissed. Naruto shared a hard look with Sasuke, to which the boy gave a nod. Their plan was a go. The Kiri ninja appeared a few feet away, stepping out of the mist amongst the bloodbath. Kubikiribocho was resting easily on his shoulder, dripping red from its victims. Good God, Tazuna breathed, taking in the sight. Naruto couldn't help but agree, it was gruesome. But he didn't have time to think about that right now. He had to focus on Zabuza, and Haku, wherever he was. I'll ask only once, Kakashi, Zabuza snarled. Hand over the bridge builder, and your little kitties don't die. Naruto noticed his sensei's slight change in stance at the mention of his genin, fist clenching tightening around his kunai, feet spread just a tad further apart. If he had to jump to protect one of them, he'd be ready. Your battle is with me, Zabuza, he growled back. The Kiri ninja scoffed, but hefted his sword off his shoulder anyway, shifting into an attack stance. HMPH, as you wish. With that, he rushed forward, sword held up at the ready. Kakashi-sensei immediately ran forward to greet him, kunai up and Sharingan exposed. They met in the middle in a clash of steel and sparks. Not a moment later, Naruto felt a presence behind him and shouted, Sasuke. Sasuke turned and threw his kunai, just barely missing Haku as he tried to kill Tazuna himself. Naruto, now, he cried, rushing forward himself to fight the boy. Naruto summoned up 5 clones, all of them taking up defensive positions around Tazuna as the original ran off to help Sasuke. They'd agreed that even alone, Sasuke might not beat Haku, as the boy could summon his ice mirrors at will. Perhaps having 2 of them be on offense might prevent that. Naruto jumped into the battle when Sasuke aimed a kick at Haku's head. The boy dodged, ducking under it only to head straight into Naruto's oncoming punch. He jolted back from the impact, doubling over in shock. Sasuke took the opportunity to hit him with a basic lightning jutsu, paralyzing him and frying his nervous system. Haku dropped to the ground in a heap, only to melt into a puddle. It had been a water clone. Damn it, Naruto cursed, turning around only to get hit with a round of Senbon in the arm. I do not want to kill you, Shinobi-san, Haku said evenly, jumping out of the way of Sasuke's attack. But I will if I have to. You won't be killing anyone today, Sasuke growled darkly, eyes glowing Sharingan red. His hands flashed through signs quickly before he exhaled a giant fireball towards the boy. Haku somehow jumped out of the way quick enough, landing a good few meters away. Naruto, Sasuke cried. On it, Naruto shouted back, tying ninja wire to some weapons before throwing them straight at their adversary. The shuriken went straight for the boy while the kunai went wide, encircling the area while the invisible wire formed into a net. Predictably, Haku jumped away out of the shuriken's path but was caught by the ninja wire from the kunai. Now, Naruto yelled. Sasuke wasted no time picking up a length of connected wire and running a short lightning jutsu down it, watching with a sadistic smirk as Haku writhed in pain as the current of electricity ran through him. Naruto bolted forward in the hopes of securing him once he'd finished flailing. Hopefully, it wouldn't be hard now that he was actually paralyzed. He slid to a stop next to the boy, sandals slipping on the blood-slickened ground. His hands were on the boy's shoulders when he saw his opponent's hands struggling to move. The shock of seeing someone being able to move at all after a jutsu like that stopped him from recognizing just what jutsu the boy was about to perform. Secret jutsu, he breathed out, voice strained but determined. Crystal ice mirrors. Dread sank in Naruto's stomach like a stone. No, was all he managed to think before Haku disappeared from in front of him into the surrounding mist. Immediately, water was pulled from the air, and Naruto suddenly found himself trapped in a dome of mirrors, all of them with Haku standing to face him. Oh no, he breathed. Before anyone could say another word, a flash flew through the air and a storm of Senbon rained down on the 2 boys. Sasuke successfully dodged it with his Sharingan, but Naruto still received the brunt of the attack. Wincing, he fell back onto the ground, left side covered in needles like a pincushion. Damn it, Sasuke growled, straightening up. Now we have to deal with this. This was exactly what we were trying to avoid. Yeah, Naruto grumbled, plucking Senbon out of his arm as he stood up. Let's just fix this before anything worse happens, the Uchiha ground out, pressing his back to Naruto's, leaving no blind spots for them. My fire jutsus won't be enough to melt these, Sasuke commented, looking around the reflective dome. And lightning might blow our cover if I'm not careful. Good thing I have a wind affinity then, Naruto replied. Sasuke shot him an inquisitive look over his shoulder as if tempted to ask what he was planning, but ultimately decided against it. Whatever you're planning, he hissed back. Do it quickly. Smiling to himself, Naruto bunched up his sleeves and started gathering chakra in his belly, pressing it down and building up the pressure. He ran through the hand signs he'd memorized over the last week, then shouted, "Wind style. Air bullets." Condensed wind chakra shot out of his mouth at the ice mirrors. They hit, and large cracks spiderwebbed across the surface instantly, reflections disappearing from inside the ones he'd hit. But they didn't shatter. Damn it, he cursed, jumping out of the way of another hail of Senbon. The mirror was already mending itself, and Haku's reflection had returned to its surface. We need another tactic, Naruto called. And preferably one that doesn't use your Mangekyo. Well, if I used Chidori, Sasuke growled darkly. Naruto clenched his jaw hard to keep from biting back. Now wasn't the time for arguing. I could use my clones, he offered. If all of them focus a wind jutsu on one mirror, it should crack, he pointed out. You saw what only one of me did. And you could use your Sharingan to make sure he doesn't hit me before I do it. But what after, genius? The Uchiha shot back, throwing a kunai to deflect more Senbon. He's too fast. If we try to leave, he'll stop us. If you used one of your wind jutsu on my fire jutsu, he won't be able to get us. Yeah, and he'll be dead because of it. Naruto argued, trying to duck another blow from a lightning-quick Haku. He felt something sharp cut into his side anyway and hissed out a silent curse. How about we just try it my way, K? When he received no reply from Sasuke, he took it as permission. Forming the hand sign, Naruto summoned 5 shadow clones, wasting no time to jump into the wind jutsu after. All 6 Narutos aimed at one of the mirrors, readying the jutsu. They all struck, compressed chakra hitting one mirror and shattering it with a loud crash. The pieces fell to the ground, bursting into small silvery shards at the impact. They'd done it. Before he could take a step forward, he heard a sharp gasp behind him. Whirling around, he saw Sasuke with one of his own kunai stabbed into his shoulder, Haku standing behind him. He had somehow managed to sneak up from behind him. Move and your friend dies, Haku threatened, tone dark and serious. The split second it took for Naruto to remember Sasuke was in no real danger and could have easily gotten away, only letting it happen because of shock, was a split second too long. Haku took advantage of this, and immediately Naruto found himself with Senbon sticking out of all his major nerve endings. The pain was incredible, and even worse was the numbness that ran through his body right after. He dropped to his knees, legs no longer able to hold him up, and his hands scraped themselves on the rough stone when he tried to stop his fall. You idiot! Sasuke shouted. He yanked the kunai out of his shoulder and went to stab Haku, but he'd already disappeared into the mirrors. Fuck. Another hail of Senbon came down, which just barely missed Sasuke. The next time Haku went flying to other mirrors, Sasuke shot blistering hot fire jutsus at him. But even with his Mangekyo he never managed to get in a good shot. This continued for nearly a minute before finally, he let out a ferocious growl. Fuck this, he shouted before running through a series of hand signs Naruto knew by heart. He was planning using Chidori. No, he cried, just as the sound of chirping birds filled the air. Lightning chakra wreathed Sasuke's hand in a deadly, deafening current. The killing intent radiating from him was enough to make the breath freeze in Naruto's throat. Sasuke, no, he cried from the ground. Sasuke ignored him and rushed towards the mirrors, Chidori chirping madly in his hand. At this point it didn't matter how fast Haku was, with Sasuke's Sharingan, he wasn't going to miss his target no matter what. He was going to kill Haku. Then saw something out of the corner of his eye that froze all the blood in his body. Kakashi-sensei was on the ground, Zabuza Momochi standing above him, sword raised for a finishing blow. He could see Sensei's hair was streaked with red from an obvious blow to his head. He didn't look to be able to move out of the way of the swordsman's blow. He was going to die. Kakashi-sensei was going to die. Haku was going to die. No, no, no. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let anyone die. He had to do something. But he couldn't move at all. What could he do? What could he do? Suddenly, something strong and powerful rushed through him. He threw his head back and screamed. Light burst from him, shooting out every which way and into the mist. He heard mirrors shatter and stone crack. Someone cried out in alarm. Then, all sounds of battle disappeared, and he was left with the sound of his own ragged breath to fill his ears. What had just happened? Wearily, he blinked his eyes open and was stunned at what he saw. Chains of glowing golden light were protruding from his torso and back, sinking into the ground or shooting into the air. In front of him, they had wrapped themselves around both Haku and Sasuke, freezing them where they stood. Sasuke's hand, no longer sparkling with Chidori, was held just over Haku's heart, inches away from finishing him off. But he'd been stopped at the last second by the chains. Off to the side, they had caught Zabuza's descending sword, links wrapped tightly around the blade held over the man's head. Other chains had sprouted up from the ground and were holding onto the ninja's feet and arms, completely immobilizing him. Naruto had done that. Arg! The shout rang across the bridge. It was followed by the Kiri ninjas squirming and fighting with his restraints while Naruto's sensei watched on in shock. What are these? Zabuza cried out in frustration. Naruto couldn't even answer that. Naruto! Sasuke shouted, dragging his attention away. The boy had craned his neck to glare at him with livid eyes. Let go of me. Let me kill him. Lightning sparked across his arm, killing intent spilling across the battlefield. Without his consent, Naruto felt the chains holding Sasuke back weaken, and fear gripped him at the thought of them breaking. No! The shout came from a new voice, and suddenly his vision was filled with pink and red as Sakura burst in front of him. Without pausing, she sent her first sailing right into Sasuke's head, the resounding crack echoing across the bridge. The boy slumped to the ground, unconscious. Not wasting a second, Sakura drew back again and jabbed something at Haku, too fast for Naruto to see. Blood spurted from his neck, and he fell down in a heap. No! Naruto cried. Haku's mask cracked upon his impact, splitting in two and falling to the ground. His face was bared for the world to see, lifeless eyes staring ahead into nothing. Dead. Naruto couldn't believe his eyes. Sakura had just killed Haku. Sakura. Turning her head ever so slightly, Sakura met his eyes and winked. Wait, why? Frowned, Naruto's eyes trailed down her arm and stopped when he saw what was clutched in her hand. An empty vial of blood and a syringe. A syringe she had filled with a sedative this morning. Naruto's eyes widened in realization. Haku was alive. Out of the corner of his eye, however, he saw Zabuza staring at the sight with wide, bewildered eyes, not recognizing the scene for what it really was. Recognizing the moment as the perfect distraction, Kakashi-sensei kicked out hard at Zabuza's legs, forcing them to buckle under him. The Kiri ninja dropped his sword from the shock of it, and quickly Kakashi-sensei was standing above him with his head in a headlock, right hand flashing with lightning which was pressed against his neck. Try to get up, Kakashi-sensei growled under his breath, Chidori held against his throat. See what happens. Zabuza wisely remained to stay still. A silence permeated the air on the bridge for a long moment, tense and stifling. In the time, Zabuza's eyes were trained solely on Haku's body, unwavering in their intensity. The four of them left standing were breathing hard, Naruto most of all. The chakra chains he'd created still clung to Zabuza and the now unconscious Sasuke, a golden glow emanating from them. It was almost beautiful if the scene before them all wasn't so horrific. Finally, unable to sustain the strain of them, the chains released, thus breaking the silence around them. They unraveled themselves from Zabuza and Sasuke's forms and zipped back into his body, sinking into his flesh as they'd never been there in the first place. Gasping, Naruto fell onto his hands as a sudden wave of exhaustion came over him. Immediately Sakura rushes over to him, grabbing him by the arms and helping him up. He was numb and tired and bone-weary but didn't have long to focus on it as a new presence had made itself known. Zabuza Momochi, someone sneered. How pathetic are you, being beaten some teacher and his brats. Naruto looked up to see Gato standing near the end of the bridge, and a massing of criminals behind him, all holding some type of weapon. They all looked ready for a fight. I knew it was a good idea not to pay you, Gato continued, a devilish smirk on his face. Would have been a waste if I had. And what's that supposed to mean? Zabuza asked darkly. Gato let out a loud laugh in response. As if I would have actually paid you. You, a rogue ninja. I never planned on giving you a cent. Naruto could see from where he was leaning against Sakura the dark look that passed over Zabuza's face. He knew that look. It meant someone was going to die. Kakashi, Zabuza said in a light tone. It seems my contract is at an end. You are no longer my enemy. Slowly, Kakashi-sensei released his hold on the rogue ninja, Chidori fizzling out. It would seem so, he agreed. My sword, please, Zabuza drawled. Eyeing him for a long moment, Kakashi-sensei ever so reluctantly handed it over. Gato's face fell when he realized what was happening. You're going to regret that, dickhead, Zabuza growled. His fist tightened around the hilt of Kubikiribocho the same moment the crime lord gulped in fear. Gato stepped back behind his hired thugs, fear creeping into his voice, and said, kill them all. His men let out a war cry and rushed forwards across the bridge, weapons held high in a manner that was supposedly threatening. Under his wrappings, Zabuza with a bloodthirsty grin took off to meet them. The first few to meet him were the first to die. Kubikiribocho swung in a wide arc, slicing through the whole first wave. Screams of pain were followed by blood and guts spilling onto the bridge. Weapons were dropped on the ground, followed by bodies. More came after. Very quickly, startlingly quickly, almost all the thugs were down, butchered, bashed, or some other variation of being sliced open. Now only Gato was left. Realizing his chances of surviving, Gato turned and bolted for the end of the bridge, desperate to get away from the bloodthirsty rogue ninja. Not so fast, Zabuza rasped, shooting after him. He flickered away only to reappear before Gato. The man didn't even get a chance to scream before Zabuza lifted his leg and kicked the man in the chest, sending him sprawling. He landed on his ass with a heavy thump. Hefted his sword, Zabuza gave the man one final glare before he brought it down. It sliced cleanly through his neck, decapitating him instantly. Then it was silent. The smell of blood permeated the air with its sickening, warm scent. There were at least 30 bodies now littering the ground, adding to the already dead builders that came before. Both the smell and sight would have made a younger Naruto gag, but as it was, he was almost used to it. Next, to him, Sakura was keeping her composure cool and collected. The sight of a body or the smell of blood was nothing new to her. She didn't even blink. Zabuza stood over the body of Gato with Kubikiribocho resting between the crime lord head and his neck. Blood was pooling out of the body, slowly forming a thick red puddle at the rogue ninja's feet. It was a gruesome sight to behold. It seems your reign of terror is at an end, he growled in his low, raspy voice. Gato's body remained motionless. I guess you won't be needing your money now. Zabuza, Kakashi-sensei called out from across the bridge. You're not going to take all of it for yourself, are you? Zabuza turned to give him a sneer, eyes narrowed and thinly veiled detest. What does it matter to you, he replied. These people are living in poverty because of the money Gato took from them. Surely you can leave some for them, his sensei continued, keeping his voice lighter for diplomacy. My kill, my cash, was all Zabuza said, picking his sword up from the ground before turning away. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some money to collect. Naruto watched with abhorrence as Zabuza walked away, right past Haku's body and the rest of the assembled group. He didn't even spare a glance at his apprentice. It was sickening. You can't be that heartless. Naruto suddenly cried out. Zabuza stopped in his tracks before turning, the Jonin leveling him with a hard look. What was that, brat? You're just going to take all that money from these poor people. He continued, anger at the injustice coursing through him. It sent energy coursing through him that he didn't even know he still had. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself up off the ground onto his legs, still numb from Haku's senbon. Sakura let out a squeak of protest, but he waved her off, facing off with the Kiri ninja instead. You're just gonna let these people suffer. And leave Haku. He's your apprentice and you're just gonna leave him. Shut up, brat, Zabuza growled. You don't know anything. Yes, I do, he shouted, fists clenched at his sides. No one's cold enough to do that. No one's that cruel. Haku cared about you, fought for you, and you're just gonna leave him here. Shut up, brat, Zabuza snarled from afar. He's dead. In the shinobi world, that means useless. And I have no use for useless things. You can't mean that, Sakura gasped. He would have given his life for you. And he had, in another time. Yeah, you ungrateful dick, Naruto shouted. You don't get to lecture me about my own tool. But he's not your tool. Naruto shot back. He looked up to you, he protected you, he admired you. You were his precious person, his reason for living. He was willing to die for you. Shut up, brat, Zabuza shot back in a hoarse voice. No, you were his whole world and you don't even care that he's dead. I said shut up. The wave of killing intent that followed his words left Naruto stunned into silence. But what was even stunning were the tears streaming down Zabuza's face. I know, kid, he said, softer this time. So shut up. Naruto blinked, taken aback. Shinobi are trained to be tools, Zabuza continued hoarsely, eyes now focused solely on Haku's body. We're trained not to feel. Not to care. Only to complete the mission. Naruto disagreed, but he kept that to himself. You say I don't feel anything, the Kiri ninja said, now addressing Naruto. That's a lie. Despite what we're told, shinobi are still human. You can bury those feelings as deep as you want, but they're still there. A pause. Then, Zabuza's eyes shot over to his own and he held his gaze for a long moment. So don't dare tell me I'm heartless, he said. No one's truly heartless. Unbidden tears were pricking at both Naruto's and Sakura's eyes. Then, just out of sight, someone behind them shifted and let out a low moan. Startled, Naruto and Sakura turned around to find Haku. Naruto gasped. How? Zabuza breathed. And indeed, there was Haku, very much alive thanks to Sakura's deception, pushing himself up onto his elbows. Sasuke still lay unconscious next to him, but it didn't seem to be a problem. Blinking in confusion, Haku's eyes roamed around the battlefield before settling on Zabuza and widened in surprise. Zabuza, he gasped. I have failed you. You're alive, was all Zabuza could reply with. Haku blinked. I am. He blinked again, clearly confused. Turning his gaze to Naruto and Sakura, he stared at them before asking, why am I alive? You should have killed me. That was your mission. Our mission was to keep the bridge builder alive, Naruto replied, still somehow standing. But we can do that without having to kill anyone. But now I've lost my purpose, Haku argued, struggling to his feet. He was still weak from the sedative Sakura injected him with, and thus only made it into a kneeling stance. I have failed my master, Zabuza. You should have killed me. Hey, Naruto shouted. You heard it yourself, my dream is to save all my friends. I can't do that if one of them wants to die. Haku blinked in startlement, taken aback by his words. Even Zabuza was startled into silence. You said you hoped I would achieve my dreams, Naruto continued. Well, help me do that by staying alive, you know. Haku could only stare on in bewilderment. Friends, he managed, brown eyes blown wide. Naruto let out a short, slightly pained laugh. Now that all the excitement was over, fatigue was starting to creep up on him. His numb legs were shaking from the effort of trying to keep him up, reminding him of all the needles sticking painfully out of his body. Yeah, friends, you know. It was all he managed to get out before his vision swam and suddenly turned to black. The next thing he knew he was pitching towards the ground.